I've experienced strange things throughout my life. Enough, in fact, that I've mostly learned to shrug off weird occurrences. But one incident about maybe 2 years ago now, it still unsettles me to this day. I'm a doctor, and at the time I was working long shifts at the hospital, so exhaustion was almost a permanent state. Keep that in mind. Now, that evening, I had returned home and was spending a quiet night in my bedroom with my brother and his girlfriend. My room has a bunk bed. I slept on the top bunk and my brother took the bottom. His girlfriend was sitting beside him on the mattress, watching a movie on her phone or something. I was absolutely drained and I fell asleep almost immediately, thinking that I'd get a few hours before having to wake up for an early shift. Some hours later, I woke to a heavy, unnatural silence. The house was dark, still, and quiet, but it was too quiet. I glanced at my phone, almost 5 a.m. Groggy, I turned my head toward the bottom bunk, and that's when my stomach sort of dropped. My brother was asleep, but someone, or perhaps something, was sitting next to him, staring at me intently, and it looked exactly like his girlfriend. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and even called her name softly, but there was no response. The way that she or it was staring at me, it didn't feel casual at all. It was deliberate, almost predatory in its stillness. My mind raced, but I forced myself to rationalize that maybe she had snuck back after curfew, maybe she had just fallen asleep there. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of wrongness about the whole situation. I carefully climbed down from the top bunk and headed toward the bathroom, keeping my eyes on her or it the entire way. The figure, it did not move a muscle though, didn't blink, didn't even breathe visibly. It just simply sat there, fixed on me, as still as a statue and completely silent. I used the bathroom and washed my hands, and I returned to my bunk. When I lay down, I tried to convince myself that it was exhaustion, a hallucination caused by way too little sleep. And so I eventually drifted back into a fitful rest. Morning came, and with it, a dose of stark reality came about too. I casually asked my brother what time that he had taken his girlfriend home. He looked at me blankly and then pulled out his phone. She had apparently left before 1 a.m. and he had said goodbye to her as she left, allegedly. Upon seeing that, I froze. But I swear to you that I saw her sitting on the bottom bunk, staring at me at around 5 a.m. He stared at me, pale and silent, and for a few seconds neither of us moved. He asked me the same question again to be sure, but I recounted the same details exactly as I remembered them. The text confirmed it too. She definitely wasn't there, not for hours at that point. The memory of that night is vivid. The way her or the thing's face mirrored hers perfectly, down to the smallest details too. The silence that pressed against me, the impossibility of what I had seen. It wasn't just a shadow, a trick of the light, or a dream or anything. I mean, I was awake, aware, and fully conscious. I've never shared that incident widely because no one wants to be labeled as overworked and hallucinating things, right? But I know what I saw, and I just cannot explain it. Maybe it was a doppelganger, maybe some inexplicable paranormal manifestation. Whatever it was, it had her face and it had my attention in a way that felt chillingly intentional. To this day, I still hesitate whenever anyone in my family mentions staying late at my place, and I make sure that the bedroom doors are locked before I go to sleep now. I don't know what that thing was, but I do know one thing. It was definitely not her. On the nights when work finally let go of me, I'd usually take the long way home just to feel my shoulders loosen again. Anyone who works in a hospital knows just how those shifts can really drain the life straight out of you. By the end, you're walking around on tired legs and stubborn adrenaline, really. My way of shaking it off was simple. Coast along quiet roads by the water, sometimes alone and sometimes with my closest friend, talking about anything except for work. We'd sit near the shore, watch the sky for a bit, and let the sound of the waves unknot whatever the day had twisted up. But recently, one ride home changed the way that I look at those late night drives forever. I was supposed to leave work at around 11, but one emergency stretched out into another, and by the time that my replacement arrived, it was nearly 1:30 in the morning. I stepped outside into a gust of freezing wind that made the parking lot feel deserted. Leaves skidded across the asphalt like they were being chased, and a co-worker who'd arrived earlier warned me as I clocked out. "Hey, you should skip the main highway tonight. It's acting like a wind tunnel. Take the old coastal road instead." The old road added time, but it hugged the cliffs and the forests, sheltered from the worst of the wind. I didn't think twice. I was too worn out to fight a steering wheel for 40 straight minutes. The forest, it swallowed me quickly. My headlights carved out a small tunnel through the trees, and the wind pushed at the car now and then, not violently, but just enough to remind me that I was alone out there for sure. I put on a podcast to stay alert, but my mind kept drifting to the idea of crawling under my blankets the moment that I got home. Eventually, the highway dipped near a tiny coastal settlement, barely more than a handful of buildings. An old store, a couple of shuttered restaurants, and a rundown fuel stop that always smelled like seawater and rust. I wasn't expecting to see anyone awake, so the pickup idling beside the pumps caught my eye. The silhouette inside wasn't clear, but just knowing another human was awake at this hour oddly eased me a bit. Maybe because it made the emptiness of the road feel less absolute. I'm not sure what the case was, but that's just how I felt. Past the settlement was one of my favorite places, though, a pull-off overlooking a short, stony beach. I'd stopped there dozens of times on better nights, and I could feel exhaustion dragging my focus down, so I figured that I'd pause for a few minutes to breathe some cold air and wake myself up a bit. The parking area was deserted. I rolled down my window, and the cold rushed in with a harsh, salty bite. For a moment, I stepped out to get a look at the water, but the wind hit me so sharply that it began to sting my eyes a bit. So I climbed back inside, cranked the heat up, and let the sound of the waves fill the dark. It felt good, like I finally had a moment that belonged only to me. Halfway through this break, another pair of headlights drifted into the lot. The vehicle, another truck, kept its distance and then turned off. The instant that their lights died, the darkness pressed in again, thicker than before, and suddenly I felt a little bit uneasy, which at first didn't make any sense. I mean, people stopped here all the time, but still, something about the stillness, the hour or something, or maybe it was the stormy wind, made the space between the two vehicles feel much smaller than it actually was. I told myself that I'd finish my cigarette and then I would head home. For a minute or two as well, it was just the waves again. Then I heard a faint crunch, the sound of gravel shifting under weight. I glanced at the window, but there was nothing. My eyes were certainly tired by now, and my mind was tired, so I blamed the true crime podcast that I was listening to religiously and tried to move on. When I pressed my foot lightly on the brake, the red glow lit up the rear of the car for a moment, and something flickered in the mirror. Instinctively, I turned to look behind me, but the shadows hid everything, and I almost laughed it off. Almost. Before reversing, I checked my side mirror again, and there, a crouched shape was pressed against the side of my car, close enough that I could see a shoulder and the outline of a hood. For a second, my lungs forgot how to work, and the figure was leaning forward like he'd been edging toward the driver's door. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed the accelerator on and shot backward, the tire skidding over the gravel. The figure jerked away from the brake light glow, and as I shifted to drive, my headlight swept across him. It was an adult man in dark clothes, sprinting toward the other vehicle in the lot. I didn't wait to see if he reached it. I tore back into the coastal highway with my heart ricocheting inside of my chest. I kept scanning the rearview mirror, hoping and praying that I had misread what I had seen. But a minute later, the headlight slipped onto the road far behind me. I pushed the car harder now. The problem with the coastal road, though, is that it barely has intersections, just a long winding stretch between cliffs and trees. So if he really wanted to catch up to me, there weren't many places for me to disappear. As I rounded a bend, the trees formed a sort of momentary blind spot. A narrow dirt turnoff appeared to my left, a maintenance road that I'd only noticed once before. I didn't think. I just swerved into it and sped up the incline, cutting the lights as soon as I figured that I'd gone far enough. Darkness swallowed the car, thankfully. The trees closed in around me like a huge wall. I could hear nothing but wind and my own breathing, which didn't sound steady anymore. I waited. 10 minutes, 20 minutes passed. No headlights, no engine, nothing. The fear, it drained out slowly, leaving behind that strange hollow calm that you get before a scare finally lets go of you. When I finally felt steady enough to move, I switched the ignition on without turning the lights up more than a dim glow. The road was so narrow that it took a really awkward series of turns to face the right direction again. At the main highway, I paused. The road stretched empty in both directions. Thankfully, not a single vehicle in sight. The rest of the drive home, it felt twice as long that night, but very quiet. One Jeep passed me going the opposite way, and later a police cruiser, but otherwise the entire coastline just felt completely abandoned. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the only thing that I wanted to do was to lock the car, bolt the door behind me, and forget the cold night air entirely. I haven't gone back to that beach after dark since then. Honestly, I'm pretty terrified of that spot now after what happened, and I certainly will not be going back there again. It was late winter when all of this happened, and it was one of those mornings where it was pretty cold. Now, at home we keep a single cow, and once in a while we let her roam the open patch behind our house so that she can graze and stretch a bit. She was still fairly new to us back then, still a little bit skittish around unfamiliar noises and sudden movement. That morning, she bolted the moment that we unlatched her rope too, weaving through the yard like she had been waiting all night for that burst of freedom. My father was already outside trying to block her path, so I hurried out to help before she injured herself. In all of the rush, I barely noticed how loose my pants were and how shallow the pockets were, but I had shoved my phone into one of the pockets anyway, knowing very well that it could slip out at any moment. For the first 10 minutes, I kept patting the pocket out of habit, but with both of us chasing the cow in circles, squeezing behind the sheds and trying not to fall in the mud, I eventually forgot to check, and by the time that we managed to coax her back inside, the morning chaos, it had drained all of my attention. I went inside to rest for a moment, sat on my bed and reached for my phone, and that's when I realized that my pocket was empty. I retraced every step immediately, checking the ground, calling my number, but it just wouldn't ring. It had already been switched off, you see. That was the moment, too, that I was suspicious and sort of knew that someone had taken it rather than it being lost somewhere in the grass. We pulled up the security camera footage, hoping for some clarity. And the video? It showed a man riding past on a bicycle, pausing and leaning down to pick something up, and then pedaling away as if nothing had happened. His face was blurred and the footage was grainy, so we couldn't identify him, but still, I filed a police report, blocked the SIM, tried tracking apps, and nothing really helped. It wasn't even the phone itself that bothered me, to be honest. It was actually the small SD card inside of it, holding years of old photos, family gatherings, celebrations, trips, and even some memories that I hadn't revisited in years. Losing all of that felt worse than losing any device. The days, they passed slowly after that, and quite honestly, I didn't expect to ever see the phone again. I had mentally prepared myself to let it go, really. But then, one morning, something strange happened. My father called out from the front yard, saying that a man on a cycle had just passed by and he thought that he recognized him from the footage. At first I thought that he must have been mistaken. Why would the same person come back near our house again? But he insisted. He caught up with the man and confronted him directly too. I didn't try to ease into it or anything, I just told him to return the phone that he had taken from our property. The shift in his expression was immediate though, like he had been unexpectedly cornered. He stammered that he would give it back later, claiming that he had errands to finish. We refused to let him leave though, and his tone changed quickly, growing aggressive, loud, defensive. My father warned him that if he didn't cooperate that the police would be called, and when they arrived, the situation took the most unbelievable turn. Instead of panicking or denying everything, the man began verbally attacking the officers. He yelled at them as if he outranked them, and that was when the truth slipped out. He wasn't just some passerby, you see. He worked in law enforcement, an assistant sub-inspector. For a moment, none of us spoke. It was sort of surreal. A member of the police force arguing with the other officers after being caught stealing? Once confronted fully, he admitted that he had taken the phone, but claimed that he had passed the SIM card and the SD card to somebody else. The officers took us along to retrieve them from that man, and after that, we went to the officer's own house where the phone was sitting casually among his other belongings. Piece by piece, too, everything was recovered. But here's the really eerie part. So, years later, we actually found out that this police officer was involved in some really terrible things. Kidnapping, trafficking, I mean, you name it, this guy was involved. Which begs the question, right? Did he keep my phone and did he hand it over to some ring connection or something? Were they planning something? Even now, the whole sequence feels improbable. The timing, the coincidence of my father noticing the same cyclist passing at that exact moment, the recovery of everything before it got sold or passed on to others. Whatever the explanation was, I'm just relieved that the memories that I thought that I'd lost forever, they made their way back to me. And also that that police officer was eventually caught. I was finishing up paperwork near the end of my shift the other night when my phone buzzed on the desk. The screen showed a number that I didn't recognize. Normally I would let it ring. I get enough spam calls to know better. But for no clear reason, I answered this time. There wasn't a voice, just a slow and low, steady crackle, like wind blowing across an old radio. I listened for a couple of seconds, thinking that maybe the signal was weak or something. I said hello once, then again louder, and right when I was about to end the call, the static faded just enough that I thought that I heard some inhaling, like they were standing close to the receiver but unsure about speaking. The moment that I focused on it, it dissolved back into noise. I didn't say anything thoughtful or clever. Instead, what came out was, if you're trying to talk to me, then talk. Not angry, but just sort of strangely certain, I guess. The static sharpened for a moment, and then the line went dead. I checked the display. The time was 3:14 in the afternoon. I made a mental note of it only because I don't usually care about odd calls, yet this one felt more intentional than normal. A couple of hours later, driving home, I mentioned to my wife during our usual end-of-day call. I said something like, I had a weird one today, just static. Felt like someone on the other end. I asked whether she had gotten any strange calls herself. She paused and said that she had. An unknown number, no message. What time, I asked. There was a bit of silence and then 3:14, she said. That prickling sensation, the one that hits at the spine first, set in immediately. Not fear exactly, but just a shift, like the room got smaller. Well, later that evening, while we were at our daughter's basketball practice, the thought came back to me. I asked her casually, half joking, half not, "You didn't happen to get any call from a weird number today, did you?" She nodded, didn't answer it. Her phone said 3:14. I stepped outside of the gym and called my wife again. "Ask your son if he got one too. Check the timestamp." A minute later, she called back. 3:14. At that point, curiosity turned into something sharper. I have siblings, a big family in fact. We've always been close in a way that survives distance and time, so I started calling one by one. I didn't lead them, I just asked if they had gotten an unknown call that afternoon. And almost all of them had. Static for the ones who picked up, silence and no voicemail for the rest. Same time, 3:14 p.m. The only person who didn't get the call was one of my nieces, who apparently had her phone turned off during an exam that time. We didn't come up with a theory, too. We didn't try to make it into something dramatic. I mean, no one said, "This must mean so-and-so," or whatever. We just sat there with it, quietly, the way that you sit with something that feels like messaging, but without content. My mother, she passed several years before that day. She was the kind of person who checked in on everyone as well, whether you needed it or not. The type who remembered every birthday, every appointment, every worry that you forgot to mention twice. I can't say it was her. I can only say that the moment that I realized how many of us got that call, I recognized the feeling that I had had in my chest. Not fear, not comfort either, but just recognition on the other end. Sometimes things happen that don't fit well with a theory, I guess, even a hopeful one. I don't know who dialed all those phones. I don't know why it happened at the exact same time. And I don't know why I answered mine when I just never do. But I remember that silence on the line, and the sense that someone had tried, however imperfectly, to reach across distance. Maybe emotional, but maybe something else too. That was enough for me. Not to explain it, but just to remember it, I guess. I still don't save unknown numbers, but sometimes I check the clock before I decline the call now, just in case. I didn't develop my uneasiness about the dark all at once. It came on slowly, like a habit that I didn't realize I was forming. When I was younger, I would tear around outside with my brothers long after the streetlights blinked off. We used to run the length of White Rock Lake without thinking twice, circling back in the evening like it was part of our routine. But sometime in my teens, something happened that pressed a permanent fingerprint into the way that I feel about nighttime. I can trace it back to a summer that I'd spent at my dad's place. I hadn't visited him regularly for years, but that particular July I found myself wanting to reconnect. So one night, almost midnight, I decided to take my dad's neighborhood loop on foot. Nothing dramatic motivated it, I just needed to clear my head a bit. So I clipped my little chihuahua's leash on, slipped on some sandals, and stepped out into the sleepy Mesquite suburb. The street was mostly empty. A few porch lights glowed behind trimmed hedges, a sprinkler clicked lazily somewhere down the block. I've always liked the quiet sort of suburb soundscape too. It's always just felt nice to me. I had nearly reached the main road too when a pickup turned into the neighborhood. A big, older model truck, maybe red or maroon, but it rolled past with all the windows down. The driver had one arm hanging out of it, fingers tapping the door, and he looked at me the way that someone looks when they're trying to place where they'd seen you before. Except there was nothing familiar about him. His expression didn't fit the situation. It was too interested, too quick. It wasn't outright threatening or anything, but just odd enough to stir something in the back of my mind. I kept walking, and really I shouldn't have. The heat was hitting heavier than before, and my dog kept flicking her ears like she could hear something that I couldn't. That was when I decided to turn around, partly because of the humidity now and partly because of the strange feeling gnawing at me, that low, creeping instinct that tells you that something in your environment has shifted, even if nothing looks different. On my way back, the street looked mostly the same, except the stretch near the first intersection was lit up far brighter than it should have been. For a second, I thought that a homeowner had installed new floodlights, but then I saw the source. It was the same truck, and it was parked crookedly along the curb, angled just enough that its headlights flooded the sidewalk where I would be passing. It didn't look like someone had pulled over, too. It looked more like someone had stopped quickly, without thinking about the parking job at all. The driver's seat was a black shape behind the glare. Upon seeing it all, my chest tightened. I tugged my dog along faster, keeping my gaze forward. The sandal slapped uselessly against the pavement, way too loud and betraying my position. When I reached the corner and crossed the street, the headlights suddenly went dark, all at once. A moment later, the engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The way the sound followed me told me everything that I needed to know. He sped past on my right, slowing just enough to look directly at me through the open window. There was nothing dramatic about his face. He wasn't angry, wasn't panicked, not even excited. Just a really flat, observant expression, like he was watching to see what I would do next. He then accelerated toward the end of the street, which intersected into a T, one side leading toward the main road, the other leading toward my dad's house. I was halfway up the block and nowhere near fast enough. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my ears now. I scooped up my dog because I kept tripping over her, and the sandals might as well have been made of soap. I ripped them off in the end, carrying them in one hand as I cut across a patch of lawn toward the only chance that I really had, my neighbor's yard. She had had her fence removed, you see, earlier that week to be replaced. That meant that her side of the yard was wide open, and it was a perfect shortcut into the alley that ran behind my dad's house. I didn't stop to think. I veered off the sidewalk and through her yard, slipping in between her house and the property line until I reached the dark mouth of the alley. I paused, just inside of it too, barely breathing. My dad's back gate was only a sprint away now, but if the truck turned left at the intersection, he would for sure see me. I had one place to run if that happened, straight to my neighbor's back door. She had a big sliding glass door that faced the alley, and from where I stood, I could see straight into her kitchen, and thankfully, she happened to be standing there. She looked at me too, a barefoot girl gripping a trembling chihuahua and her sandals in the other hand, face flushed, hair stuck to her neck, and I waited for her to wave me over, to ask if I needed help or to open the door, but she didn't move. Not toward me and not away from me. She just watched. But that still unnerves me more than the truck does as well. In any case, finally, after what felt like an entire minute, I heard the truck engine rise, then fade as it drove further down the block, toward me. Before I could lose my courage, I sprinted for my dad's gate, shoved myself through it, and ran straight into the house. He was on the couch, and when I got in, I could barely talk, but he did not hesitate. He grabbed his keys and went out driving, circling the streets to look for this truck, but we never saw it. Nothing else came of that night, too. No police reports, no stories in the neighborhood, no answers. But even now, I avoid walking after dark unless somebody is with me these days. I don't care how quiet the street is or how familiar the houses are. I don't care if it's been years. That feeling, the feeling of being noticed for the wrong reason, it never leaves you. And if I ever did put together a little map of where everything happened, I think it would shock people just how ordinary the layout was. Just a basic suburban grid. Nothing dramatic and nothing really strange about it, which somehow makes it so much worse. I've never really figured out how to explain this story without sounding dramatic, so I usually don't tell it, but sometimes I still catch myself thinking back to that week, and how close I came to something that I just didn't have the language for at 14. Before all of this, I had been spiraling a bit, skipping classes, staying out nights my parents didn't know about, letting older friends pull me into whatever trouble that they were chasing. My parents weren't strict people, but by the middle of freshman year they were, well, exhausted. Instead of grounding me again too, they signed me up for a leadership voyage. 7 days on a training schooner, out past the bay, where everything was supposed to build confidence and character. Their words, not mine. Now, the boat wasn't big. 20 people felt like too many, in fact, but there were 10 of us teens, 2 of them girls besides me, and the rest were staff members who insisted that we call them guides, not counselors. Most of the bunks were stacked in long, narrow spaces below deck that smelled like rope, salt, and damp clothes. The only restroom was wedged against the front bulkhead, close enough to our sleeping bags that someone brushing past your feet at night became normal after the first hour. That first evening, during the safety briefing, one of the younger guides kept drifting toward wherever I was. He had that easy charm that some 19-year-olds have, overly confident, always smirking at nothing, and at dinner he sat so close that our elbows kept brushing, and every time that I tried to hide behind my paperback, he asked another question like we were old friends. Even back then, before I learned to trust my instincts, I knew something about him felt off. Too much attention and too much interest. Well, eventually one of the older boys snapped. "Dude, she's a kid." The guy laughed it off, but something changed in his face. He didn't sit near me again, but over the next few days I kept catching him glancing my way. Quick though, like he didn't want to be seen doing it. But the real problem turned out to be one of the kids. He was a year or two older than me, tall and wiry, and the type who acted like every joke was a test someone was failing. At first, I didn't mind talking to him. Being the youngest there made me cling to any scrap of friendliness, but he shifted quickly. He would sit too close during downtime. He would interrupt me to ask who I liked on the ship. He acted annoyed if I walked away to talk to somebody else too. And when I finally told him politely that I didn't want anything from him, he exploded. Not loud enough for staff to intervene, but loud enough that the boys near him went still. He threw out some bitter line about how there's nothing real out here anyway and just stormed off. After that, the air around him stayed sharp, like he wanted me to know that he was still angry. I brushed it off during the day, but the nights were much harder. Down in the cramped berth, with people snoring and shifting in the dark a few feet away, I felt constantly watched. No reason, I told myself, it was just nerves. But still, I volunteered for every late night shift that I could get, even when it meant standing alone under the mast in the cold wind, just to avoid trying to sleep beside him. Now, on the last morning, before we reached land, everyone traded contact info, and I didn't really think that I'd talk to any of them again, but it seemed harmless enough. A few hours after I'd got home, one of the boys from the trip messaged me. He didn't even start with small talk, just told me straight out that I should know something. He said that the angry boy, the one that I had rejected, had been getting up at night, standing near where I had slept, and at first he told his friends that he was keeping an eye on the girls' area, but eventually he admitted that he was watching me specifically. According to the friend, he had been doing it more than once in a night as well, sometimes lingering there for minutes before going back to his own bunk. Then the friend told me something else. One night, the angry boy joked, and he hoped it was a joke, that we were all so tightly packed that he could unzip my sleeping bag without waking me. He suggested it like he was testing the other boy's reaction, is how he saw it. The friend said that he made an excuse and went to sleep on the opposite side of the hold after that, and he didn't tell any adults. He didn't tell the girls too, he just left me there, sleeping inches away from where that boy stood. I remember reading this message over and over again, feeling my stomach drop through the floor. All those nights I had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, certain that something was wrong. I hadn't been imagining it. Someone really had been there, close enough to touch me, close enough that if he'd wanted to do something, I wouldn't have had space to sit up or do much about it. Thankfully, nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation, no police. The program sent out a cheerful thank you email, and really that was that. But for years, I would think back to that moment, especially any time that I slept in a cabin or a hostel or anywhere with more than one person beside me. I would always wake up sort of panicking a bit, convinced that somebody was standing at the foot of the bed. I'm older now, and I understand more about just how vulnerable I was in that moment, how easy it was for something terrible to have happened so quietly without anyone noticing. I don't imagine that the boy planned anything beyond what he did, but knowing that someone watched me while I was sleeping, angry and humiliated and way bigger than me, well, that was certainly enough for me to pull my head in and really start to get my life back together. I've lived in a few rough places, but there was something uniquely exhausting about the stretch of time that I spent in western Michigan. This was a few years back, when I was drifting between part-time jobs and tiny apartments, never staying anywhere long enough to settle. People love advertising Grand Rapids as this blossoming, up-and-coming city full of breweries and new tech money. But if you ever actually lived there, you knew a very different version. The one hidden behind those shiny headlines. The one that you saw after dark, when you were waiting alone at a bus stop, or weaving between empty storefronts hoping that nobody stepped out of an alley. Winter didn't make it any better either. You would think that the cold would push everybody inside, but the streets, they just got stranger. Fewer people around, fewer witnesses, I guess. I had enough unsettling encounters to last a lifetime as well. Men pulling up beside me, men following me after work, people inventing excuses to get close. It was a constant low-grade alertness that just wore me down a bit, I guess. At the time of this story, I was working at a pizza place named after an old board game, one of those chains with dingy red signs and a drafty front counter. The shop, it sat just far enough outside of the main city to seem safer, tucked between a strip mall dental office and a laundromat. But we weren't immune to trouble either, but most nights were pretty much uneventful. A few families, some late-night drinks, the occasional person asking to warm up for a few minutes, but really that was about it. Now, it was around mid-December, and I was behind the counter folding boxes, half listening to the oven timers and half sort of daydreaming about moving away again. I mean, anything felt better than starting over in a city that had already chewed me up once. Around 8, I would say, the phone rang and I answered without thinking, but something about the silence before the voice came through made my shoulders tense a bit. Not fear, but just, I don't know, maybe a heaviness or something. The man ordered a large pizza and a bottle of soda. No weird questions, no requests, no strange inflection, just flat. When I asked for a name and a number, he hesitated a bit before giving me a room number at a hotel a few blocks away. The hotel, it certainly was not known for good things. Still, we got calls from it pretty often, so usually it was tired travelers, once in a while someone down on their luck, but nothing to assume and nothing to worry about really. So I put the order in, stretched the dough, topped it, slid it into the oven and slipped into a delivery bag once it was done. Our manager that night was also the driver. He shrugged on his coat, grabbed the bags and headed out, normal as could be. About 40 minutes later, he called the store. His voice wasn't panicked, but it wasn't steady either. He told me to get a couple of plastic bags ready and to clear off a counter space. He didn't explain it and just said that he would be back in 5. When he walked through the door, the cold air followed him in, but he was sweating, eyes wide, face pale. He didn't take off his jacket and just set the delivery bag down and told us what happened. He said that the hallway of the hotel wasn't silent when he arrived, which wasn't unusual. But when he reached the room from the phone order, the door was cracked open just an inch. No lights on inside, no TV. He said that he knocked anyway, and a man stepped into view. It was the smell that hit him immediately, like metal and damp air mixed together. My manager certainly wasn't one for making dramatic assumptions easily, but he said that he knew instantly that something wasn't right. The man didn't speak, didn't look at him directly, just handed him a wad of cash and closed the door so fast that the latch echoed down the hallway. Well, he made it about halfway back to his car before something about the weight and texture of the bills, they bothered him. So he looked and he realized that the money was damp. Not rain damp, but something thicker, sticky, even in the cold. By the time that he drove back to the store, the smell had seeped into his jacket now. When he held the cash out, we all slowed down at once because it looked dark in places, crusted around the edges, as if it had dried and been re-wetted. Not dripping and not dramatic or anything, but undeniably, it was blood. We called the police. I mean, what else are we supposed to do? And 2 officers showed up about maybe 20 minutes later. They examined the bills, asked a few questions, wrote a few notes, but unless someone inside that hotel room requested help or there was visible evidence of a crime or something, really their hands were tied. A busy night, they said. They would send someone to check it out when they could. They left without the money, without asking any follow-up questions, without taking a statement from the manager that felt like more than a formality. We bleached the counter afterwards. My manager tossed his jacket into a garbage bag and tied it shut. The mood in the shop, it was quiet for the rest of the night too. Not scared or anything, but just unsettled, I guess. Because the truth is that there are hundreds of reasons that money could have been stained like that. And most of them, well, they were not comforting. I mean, maybe somebody was injured and too scared to go to a hospital. Maybe there had been a fight. Maybe the guy had just cut himself accidentally or something. But the instinct that something was wrong, it really just never left any of us. Well, I moved out of the city not long after that. Not because of that night, but because everything there just felt like a weight that I couldn't keep carrying. Country living isn't perfect by any means, but It's the quiet that makes me feel like I can breathe again. Anyway, to anyone still working late nights in places like that, always trust your instincts, even when you can't prove anything. Sometimes the story ends quietly like mine, but I can tell you that the feeling stays, and also that sometimes it doesn't end like mine. It ends much, much worse. A couple of years back, when I was trying to furnish my first apartment on a tight budget, I spent way too many nights scrolling through second-hand listings. I wasn't picky. Cheap and functioning was good enough for me. That's how I ended up answering an ad for a used appliance someone claimed was lightly worn and priced to move. It sounded simple at the time. I didn't have a car full of friends to help me shop around, and meeting sellers was kind of normal in my circle. The woman that I spoke to briefly on the phone before I left, she sounded a bit jittery, but plenty of people are awkward with strangers, so I didn't think too much of it. She told me that she lived in a big, older apartment complex a few minutes from downtown. I've driven past it hundreds of times, in fact, but never been inside. When I arrived, she was already waiting outside. She looked like she was in her mid-30s, bundled up in a jacket, even though it wasn't even that cold. At first glance, she seemed harmless, nervous if anything. She kept glancing toward the door of her building as if she was expecting someone. Inside, the place was nearly bare. No decorations, barely any furniture. It didn't look like somebody was moving out, but more like someone who hadn't lived there long enough to leave a mark was now living there. She led me to the kitchen, and the appliance was at least real, sitting right where she had said it would be, and it was old, but it was certainly intact. I checked the knobs and the burners while she hovered a bit too close. Her phone rang while I was testing one of the burners. She answered immediately, and I couldn't hear every word, but I recognized a man's voice, sharp, annoyed, and impatient. She turned away slightly, gripping the phone tight like she was getting instructions. Then she said that the appliance wasn't actually hers, that it belonged to her boyfriend, and that he wanted more money for it. The shift in the room was instant. I felt boxed in, not by anything that I could see immediately, but just an uncomfortable pressure that made it harder to breathe. There's something about the way that she repeated whatever he had told her didn't feel like she was negotiating either. It felt like she was relaying. I told her calmly that the price that we agreed on was final and that I'd rather leave it than start over. Her reaction was anything but calm. She started sweating, pacing, raising her voice in these sharp bursts that didn't make any sense. She said that I needed to stay until he got there because he'd want to talk to me himself. That part hit my stomach in a way that I didn't like. She kept checking the hallway too, then her phone, and then the hallway again. Whoever he was taking his time getting there, and she was growing more frantic by the second. I don't know why, but that scared me more than anything, I suppose. It felt like she was under pressure to keep me there. I decided I wasn't going to wait around to find out why. I told her that I would take the appliance after all and needed to grab the cash from my car. My voice came out steadier than I felt, and she followed me toward the door like she didn't trust me to come back. And the second that I stepped into the hallway, it felt easier to breathe. Outside the apartment, she kept trying to stay beside me, talking quickly, insisting that her boyfriend needed a word. I walked faster, and while she didn't chase me, she certainly didn't give me space either. Once I reached my car, I got in and locked the doors immediately and pulled out before she could say anything else. I didn't look back. I blocked the number halfway down the street, and later that night, the whole thing just kept replaying in my mind. Not because something dramatic happened, but because of how close it felt to becoming something else. And it wasn't the empty apartment or her weird behavior that stuck with me. It was the sense that I wasn't the only person that she was answering to in that room. I never bought anything in person from online listing again. A cash pickup in public places only, no exceptions. And while I don't know exactly what that woman was up to or the person on the phone, something about the whole situation just felt very, very wrong. When I first moved into my place a few years ago, I was mostly worried about learning the neighborhood rhythm, like who worked nights, who let their dogs run loose, who kept their trash cans out too long, things like this. I wasn't expecting to recognize anyone, so when I realized the man living directly across the street had been a co-worker of mine years earlier, it felt like a stroke of luck. At the time, it seemed comforting to see a familiar face, but that feeling, it didn't last long. He introduced himself again the first week that I was there, as if he wasn't sure if I'd remember him. He shook my hand a little too long, and before I knew it, he was insisting that I stop in sometime. I brushed it off politely. People get lonely, especially after retirement, and I didn't think anything of it at first. But one afternoon, he flagged me down while I was checking the mail and told me that he wanted to show me something inside of his house. Before I could decline, he was already holding his door open, and I felt awkward saying no, so I followed him. His wife was in a recliner in the living room, thin and pale, staring past us, and he nudged me forward and said, "Go on, say hello." When I politely greeted her, he said, "No need to rush off, sit for a bit." It was uncomfortable in a way that is hard to explain, like I was intruding on something intimate that had nothing to do with me. When I finally left, I promised myself that I would be firmer next time. After that, whenever I stepped outside, even for a moment, he would appear out of nowhere. I could have my hat pulled low and headphones on, and he would still tap my shoulder to get my attention. He always talked about himself too, never anything else. He never asked about my life, just unloaded pieces of his own. Sometimes he would drop off things that I hadn't even asked for, leftovers, pastries, ice cream, coffees that he'd always say that he just happened to pick up. I thanked him, but it certainly made me feel a little bit uneasy. I didn't like how often he'd remembered where I'd been or what I had worn earlier in the day and things of this nature. There was a short stretch where he stopped talking to me altogether, cold, ignoring every wave or hello even. I figured that I'd finally gotten the privacy that I wanted. Later I found out that he was upset though because I had filed a formal complaint at work, and apparently he disagreed with the person that I had reported. It didn't matter to me though, I mean, we weren't even close and he didn't work there anymore, but it clearly meant something to him. Now, for a while I thought that the distance was permanent. I didn't realize though that he was just waiting to reinsert himself again, and the first sign was when he called me about a package on my porch. I didn't answer, but less than a minute later, I saw him on my doorbell camera, leaning down to stare at the label like he owned it. He left it on the sidewalk afterward and later claimed he was checking to make sure that no one stole it. He apparently watches my porch constantly. I know this as well because he tells me, and he'll mention just how many deliveries I had this week, or what time I got home, or how long my living room lights were on for, and it's weird. But when I started fixing up the exterior of my house, I couldn't go 5 minutes without him crossing the street to talk to me as well. If I didn't respond quickly enough, he would always step closer like he couldn't imagine someone not being eager for his company. His wife passed away sometime after that, and genuinely I felt a bit bad for him in a sort of human sense, but I didn't want our relationship to change. But instead, he began inviting me into his home again, this time for dinner or just a chat or a little company in the evening. The first time I told him no politely, the second time firmly, and by the fifth or the sixth time, I was repeating myself almost verbatim. Mind you, he never seemed embarrassed, but just persistent, almost rehearsed in a way. A man in his 70s asking a woman in her 20s to come inside of his home alone 12 times, then more, isn't a harmless misunderstanding too. It's certainly deliberate. Now, one night, I stepped outside for barely 30 seconds to take out the trash, and by the time that I turned around, he was already standing halfway down his driveway like he had been waiting for the sound of my door. I pretended not to see him and walked back inside in a hurry, but now I check through the blinds before I leave the house at all. If he's outside, I wait. I've started ignoring his texts entirely, every one of them telling me to come over for supper or asking why he hasn't seen me around. But the most unsettling one came from the moment that I pulled out of my driveway last week. When you're done with your errand, come by. I'll leave the door unlocked for you. I didn't reply. I shouldn't have to sprint with my garbage can, and I shouldn't have to rearrange my schedule to avoid being trapped in conversation with this guy, or install privacy screens so that he can't see the shape of me moving in my own living room. But unfortunately, I'm already doing all of that. My stomach drops every time that my phone buzzes with an unfamiliar number because I'm afraid that he's got creative. I don't know what he wants. I don't know if he's just lonely or if there's something else going on, but my instincts have been screaming the same thing for months now. Something about this just isn't right. And the worst part, I've began hearing footsteps around my house at night, and I am almost certain that it is him. I didn't think much of old hospital buildings until the winter of 1999, when I found myself convulsing in one. I had been injured during a deployment that year and was sent to a military medical facility tucked in a quiet corner of England, an older site, half renovated, half forgotten. The parts still in use were clean enough, humming with fluorescent lights and stale tea, but beyond those wards were long, unused corridors that the staff never seemed eager to talk about. Recovery left huge stretches of the day unoccupied, and anyone who spent time in a hospital knows that idleness can make your mind itch. A handful of us, starved for something to do, scraped together a makeshift seance board one night out of boredom. It wasn't serious or anything, just soldiers trying to entertain themselves, really. We'd ask dumb questions too, laugh at the responses, blame each other for the moving glass, and really, nothing happened beyond that. A few days later, I heard someone mention a sealed-off section near the back of the grounds, supposedly an old mortuary storage wing that was never demolished. I didn't take it seriously, until I found the entrance myself. Just a heavy grey fire door that didn't latch properly. Inside was nothing dramatic. Empty rooms, abandoned equipment, and the kind of darkness that looks thicker than it should. One night, though, when the boredom had really started wearing in on me, I slipped down there alone to take a look. No plan, no ritual, just a lighter, stale air and the echo of my own footsteps. I sat on the cold floor and muttered something like, "If anything's here, then show yourself." I remember feeling foolish immediately after saying it. It was a childish dare spoken by an adult who should have known better, really. The darkness, it didn't move. No strange noises and no reply, and after 10 minutes, I left, feeling more embarrassed than spooked. I didn't think about that night again as well, until I went home on weekend leave, and being back at my mum's house felt comforting at first, even though we ended up arguing over something trivial. I stepped outside to get some air, still annoyed, and that was when I saw it. Something hovering above the row of the back gardens behind our house. Not a spirit or a visitor, nothing mystical, but just a sphere of bluish light, large and silent. It hung there too, like a lantern suspended by wires that I couldn't see. My first instinct was that I was seeing reflections from somewhere, maybe floodlights off of glass or something like that. I called for my stepfather, and to my surprise, he came quickly, took one look and said quietly, "Yeah, I see it too." Before either of us could make any sense of it though, the thing dropped slightly, as if adjusting its altitude, and then shot away faster than anything I have ever seen before. Not smoothly like a drone or a craft, but almost like it skipped a step in reality. A few minutes later, another one appeared farther away, drifting steadily. At some point while watching it too, both of us realized that the sequence of events that we were observing had somehow repeated, as though we had blanked out and resumed watching mid-scene. There was no panic, just a disorienting awareness that something wasn't matching up with time in the normal way. The third sphere came closest, close enough that I remember feeling the tiny hairs on my arms rise. My stepfather, he muttered something about having seen enough and he hurried inside. I stayed only a few seconds longer before the sensation in the air shifted, like the charge before a thunderstorm, and instinct finally overrode curiosity. I went back inside too, and I locked the door without thinking. When I returned to the hospital after leave, the old building felt less harmless than before, I guess. I still didn't tell anyone what I had seen, obviously. I mean, it felt way too strange to say out loud, even to the other lads, but 2 nights after coming back, something happened that I still struggle to categorize. You see, I had just lain down, still awake, when a tall shape formed beside my bed. No noise and no movement, just a figure there, hooded and entirely black, leaning over me. At first, I thought that it was a nurse silhouetted by the hallway, but the outline was wrong. Way too tall, too rigid, and the hood tapered upward into a sort of strange triangular point. My body wouldn't respond when I tried to sit up too, and it wasn't the chest-crushing panic of sleep paralysis, which I had experienced before in my life and knew pretty well. This was way different. I was clear-headed, alert, and utterly unable to do more than dart my eyes around. I remember noticing the fabric, the fold of the cloak, the way that it draped unnaturally straight, like it was unaffected by gravity almost. And the posture, bent forward from the hips without any curve in the spine. It was as if this thing's body just didn't articulate the ways that ours do. It vanished without transition, like one moment it was there and the next it's just gone. And I stayed frozen long after, too terrified to even breathe loudly. The following night, as I walked down the hall after a shower, I saw my roommate standing near the nurse's station in only his boxers, shaking like he had stepped out of freezing water. His face was colorless, eyes blown wide. A nurse told me that he had reported seeing a tall person in a cloak leaning over my empty bed, and he was refusing to sleep in our room any longer. Well, the years after I left service were filled with smaller oddities. Lights flickering at impossible intervals, devices turning on by themselves, the occasional unexplained sphere of light near rooftops or distant fields. The energy company once accused me of draining heaps of electricity, despite my pay-as-you-go meter showing credit. They couldn't explain it, just shrugged and recommended monitoring usage. Over time, the strange incidents thinned out a bit. Whatever happened in those months, it didn't linger forever, thankfully, and life eventually settled into something normal again for me. The old hospital has since been renovated, and unused wings sealed for good or demolished. I'm not sure which. I don't pretend to know what any of this was or what any of it means. I don't claim spirits, aliens, or something supernatural either. Realistically, all I can say is that I was injured, bored, young, and curious in places that I probably shouldn't have been. Coincidences certainly happen. Memory plays tricks, and Light behaves strangely in certain conditions for sure, and that's certainly the explanation that makes the most sense on paper, to me at least. But every now and then, when I think back to that empty mortuary room and the words that I tossed into the dark like a joke, I get the uncomfortable sense that that had something to do with whatever occurred later. I've never been the type to scare easily outdoors. I mean, I grew up around the woods, old sheds, the usual creaks and groans of rural houses. But still, there's one place that managed to get under my skin in a way that I've never quite shaken off. Back when I was around 19, I was dating a girl whose family owned a small property deep in the countryside. More of a hunting cabin than a traditional farmhouse, really. It sat by a narrow pond that looked black after dusk, and the trees packed so tightly around the clearing that the place always felt like it was trying to hide from the rest of the world. Her family had held onto it for decades. They'd come in the winter for hunting trips, patch up what needed fixing, then leave it alone for months at a time and come back again. I had visited plenty of times with her, and though the place had its quirks, like drafty floors, mismatched furniture, strange noises from old plumbing, I never felt unsafe there. The only thing that I didn't care for was the back wing of the house. It was a cramped hallway, led to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, and that end of the building just never seemed to warm properly, no matter how long the heater ran. Something about that hallway made me uneasy enough too that I started choosing the tree line over the bathroom at night. My girlfriend told me once that she and some friends had used a Ouija board there years earlier, and that the experience frightened her so badly that she refused to return for a long time. I chalked it up to teenagers spooking themselves in an old house, right? Even though I believed in the possibility of the unexplained, I didn't place any weight on the story, I guess. I mean, whatever had happened clearly wasn't happening anymore. Well, one weekend her brother invited us to tag along while he and 2 of his friends went hunting. These guys were the kind who could fall asleep in the middle of a field and not even bat an eyelid, even if a branch snapped behind them. Just solid, grounded, and not prone to imagination sort of guys. After they came back from the woods that evening, we set up a projector in the living room with a bedsheet and played Mario Kart while the wind scraped along the siding outside. Everything was fine, until the entire house sort of jolted with a single violent impact. The sound was deep and concussive, like something heavy had slammed into the structure from the outside. All 5 of us jumped at once. The windows rattled, a few picture frames tilted. It felt like a blow to the chest, if I'm being honest. The noise had come from the back rooms, and the first theory was simply that another tree had come down. It had happened to a shed on the property before, apparently, and so it wasn't totally unexpected. We grabbed our flashlights and headed down the hallway together. The first bedroom on the left was completely untouched. The next was normal too. But when we reached the last room, the one wedged in the far back corner, we stopped dead in the doorway. Everything in that room, like everything, had been thrown to one side. Not fallen, not knocked, but like pushed. In fact, the queen bed was sort of half raised against the wall, like someone had tried to turn it upright. Both dressers had slid several feet and were jammed crookedly into the corner. A recliner lay on its back with its legs in the air. Lamps had rolled across the floor, and all of it was clustered along the right-hand wall as if a sudden force had swept through it. Hours earlier, the room had been perfectly normal, mind you. In fact, her brother had dropped his duffel bag there that afternoon. But now, the bag was nowhere in sight. I remember the silence more than the shock, I guess. 5 people stood there, breathing shallowly, all of us realizing at the time that whatever had done this wasn't something that we wanted to understand. And no animal could have entered without breaking a window. No human could have rearranged a furnished room that quickly without us hearing movement, and especially with not just one single impact like that. And nothing about it suggested a tree had hit the house. I mean, there was no damage, no evidence of anything striking the exterior. We checked at least twice. Someone said, though, at some point that we need to go, and we didn't argue. We grabbed what we could reach, and we just bolted. Her brother never even looked for his bag. He practically leapt into his truck. And back at her parents' place, we tried to explain what happened. They shut it down immediately, though. Too much imagination, too much drinking, too much exaggeration. But her dad agreed to go and check it out in his next routine visit, mostly to prove a point. A few days later, he drove out there alone, and when he came back, he was irritated from the start. According to him, the room was perfectly fine. Bed made, furniture exactly where it always sat, no marks on the wall, and no evidence of anything being disturbed. And her brother's duffel bag, missing since that night, was sitting neatly in the middle of the room. He accused us of pulling some kind of a prank and wasting his time. None of us knew what to say, honestly, because, we had all seen the same thing. And the image of that room, it always made my stomach tighten a bit. Well, as you can probably imagine, I didn't return to the farmhouse after that. Not because I thought the place was haunted or cursed or anything, but I just never really came to any firm conclusion to explain anything. And I just couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened that night, it just wasn't meant to involve us, and we stumbled into it by accident. I can tell you this much for certain, though. Something had moved those pieces of furniture. Something had rearranged that entire room in a way that made no sense. And then days later, everything was tidy again, as if nothing had ever happened. The simplest explanation is that there was some detail that we missed. Something mundane that our fear magnified. That's what I tell myself now anyway. But whenever I think of that hallway and the cold stillness of the back rooms, I sometimes wonder whether old buildings can still hold on to things, tensions, memories, echoes, and release them at unpredictable moments. Whatever it was, I decided that I didn't need to be around if it ever happened again. I wasn't sure how I ended up back at that house. After a long and messy divorce, it took almost 2 years to finally get the courts to grant me full access and remove my ex-wife. By that point, I'd been living in a small rental across town and had almost convinced myself that I didn't care about the old place anymore. But the thought of selling it, and maybe finally closing that chapter, it pulled me back. When my partner offered to help me clean it and repaint before listing it, I reluctantly agreed. The day that we went back, I rented a large dumpster and brought over cleaning supplies. My partner would handle painting while I sorted through the wreckage left behind by my ex. From the start, the house felt heavier than it should have. Even before we stepped inside, I noticed how quiet it seemed. My partner tried to brush it off as just a big old house, but I could see the tension in her shoulders from the moment that we opened that front door. Well, we started hauling garbage from room to room, filling the dumpster. She was unusually sharp with her words, muttering and cursing at the mess like it had some personal weight to it. I tried to focus on the work, though. But after a few minutes, she abruptly said that she needed some air, stormed outside, and disappeared around the back of the property. I assumed she was frustrated with the whole task. Cleaning a house ruined by somebody else is enough to test anyone's patience, but I kept working, shuttling trash out to the dumpster, but after a while I realized that she hadn't come back. A creeping anxiety settled over me, and so I called out her name. There was nothing. I texted to see where she had gone. Still no response. My stomach began to knot as I realized that the looped dirt road that circled the property behind this place and around the gravel pit was the only place that she could have really wandered. I set out along the loop, calling her name again and again. The sun had started to sink behind the trees now, and texts went unanswered. I circled the house several times, creeping through the yard and calling her name, my unease growing with every unanswered shout. Eventually, I drove down the small town's only road, thinking that she might have walked off in a daze or something. I went 5 miles one way and then back again, then 5 miles the other way, scanning every possible place, but there was nothing, not one trace of her anywhere. Finally, I returned to the house in a panic, and from the driveway, I saw her striding across the front lawn toward the nearest neighbor's property. I honked and she spun around, furious as though I had abandoned her. "I just went to the gravel pit and came back," she said, her voice shaking. "And you weren't there. I thought you'd left me behind." I pulled out my phone and showed her the timestamps. My first text had been over 45 minutes earlier. "I've been looking for you the whole time," I said, trying to calm her down. But in her mind, barely any time had passed. She swore that it felt like a few minutes at most. The encounter, it left us both shaken. Something about that house was wrapping our perception, or at least it felt that way. And after that day, I kept finding odd things too. The back doors of the house would be open when I knew that I hadn't touched them, even when I checked every lock. I had installed outward-facing security cameras, meant to catch intruders, and they never recorded anything unusual. And also, the feeling of being watched in that place now was absolutely palpable. Every time that I returned over the following months to clean, repaint, or check on the property, the unease returned. I never saw anyone, never caught anything on camera, but small things really, like a creak where no one should have been, a door coming ajar with no logical explanation. It all made it impossible to shake the feeling too that the house now held its own sort of will of sorts. When I finally did sell it, I breathed easier than I had in years. Not because I believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but because I realized just how much that house had become a psychological weight to me. Some places hold memories or tension in ways that we just don't understand, I suppose, and that house certainly held mine, and somebody else's as well, in a way that felt, well, almost alive, really. I still think about it sometimes too, driving past the neighborhood, and I get that same hollow unease in my stomach whenever I see it. Whatever it was, or however I imagined it, it's gone now, and I have a new place, new routines, and a peace that that house never offered. And I often try to remind myself that that's enough for me. Me and my boyfriend live in a house that his father passed away in before we lived here, and I believe that someone else had died here before that as well. There have been a handful of times in the last year where I'll wake up and think that I see someone standing over our bed. One time I thought it was my boyfriend's deceased dad, in fact, but they always end up being a poster or my dresser that I'm looking at when my eyes adjust. I can't describe it, but it sort of morphs into what the real object is. After being convinced I was seeing ghosts, I turned to the internet and I found out that those are called hypnopompic hallucinations. Now, for the past week or so, I've started to intensely see things in my peripheral vision, though. This has happened rarely throughout my life, but has been honestly non-stop happening recently. Some examples, for instance, is that I'll be sitting on my couch on my phone and I'll think that I see a black shadow-looking figure poke its head in and out from my doorway or around a corner. It happened in the same spot like 5 times within 20 minutes the other day. It's not even a split second long either. It happens very quickly, and I just never know for sure if I'm imagining it. I can't even make out anything besides its being black and somewhat looks like it has an alien or Slender Man type of thinness. Sometimes it seems tall, and other times it's happened lower in the frame. Other times I'll be on the couch watching TV and realize that I see in my peripheral what I think is someone standing in my kitchen to my right, or sometimes in my room or bathroom to the left. But whenever I look, it's just nothing. It's just random things like my dresser or stuff on my kitchen island. Other times it's just black, weirdly shaped figures that appear out of nowhere and move, and when I snap my eyes, it's gone again. It makes my heart sink every time, and honestly, it really scares me. I never know if it's actually happening, I suppose, but when I try to really think about this, I start to get genuinely concerned because I do have some mental health issues, nothing that would cause hallucinations, I guess, and am worried that this could be related to that. Or maybe it is something paranormal related, and I have no idea at this point what to do. My dad doesn't believe in the paranormal, at all. He's very logical, trying to see things with logic and common sense, but he is also religious. This encounter, though, is something that he really cannot explain, even to this day. His friends, they also witnessed this event, and I think that they were maybe around 8 to 10 kids and teenagers on that night when they went out. This encounter happened in Greece, in the Greco-Turkish border area during summer of 1969. The summer of 1969, the village my father was living in recently electrified that time, receiving power and commodities like street lamps. Before that time, much of the Greek countryside had no access to electricity or running water, so this was a huge upgrade for the village, along with its residents' living conditions. My dad, who was a kid back then, and his friends wanted to see how the village looked from afar with the lights at night. The area was pretty safe at the time, with no wildlife like wolves or bears around. There were also no real threats from people that existed at that time too for them. Parents allowed children to wander as much as they wanted, and children always came home safe. So my dad and his friends, around 8 to 10 children like I said, ages from 5 to 15 or 16 I think, went on a trip to see the village at night. They left at sunset approximately, and at around midnight or a bit later, they decided to return. Now, the way back included passing from a strip of dirt road that was sinking for a few centimeters. There was a local legend too that this strip of dirt road was haunted by the spirit of a Greek collaborator's wife that was brutally murdered via getting spiked in a wooden pole by insurgents during World War II, the German occupation of the area. It was said that it took the form of an Orthodox priest apparently. There was a bulldozer parked in the spot. They were extracting gravel from this place or something, and when the group reached the spot, they stopped. They started feeling fearful, and the weather started getting really cold all of a sudden too. They started crossing slowly, feeling a bit afraid. To combat the fear though, they started speaking loudly and singing. They had crossed half the road when one of the children, one of the older ones, looked behind and then saw, from the bulldozer, an Orthodox priest in full uniform suddenly appear. The strange thing though was that the face wasn't visible, and it was hovering a few meters off the ground. It then started following the group in a steady pace with a distance of a few meters behind them. The guy froze in fear but didn't say anything so as to not upset the group and the young children that they had with them. But a bit later, another guy turned behind and saw the priest. He panicked and screamed, "Guys, there's a ghost!" And at that, everybody panicked and started running. They ran approximately a distance of 2 and something kilometers, with the ghost following in a steady hovering pace a few meters behind them. When they reached the village's first street lamp, They were all exhausted underneath the light. The ghost stopped a few meters away behind them. For a few seconds, both the ghost and the kids just sort of stared at each other. Then, the ghost literally just vanished into thin air. Others had also seen the priest with the same description and characteristics at the time. It was a well-known legend from that time, and there are no modern reports or encounters with this specific ghost today, though. Some of the children died in following years due to old age or medical problems, but some are alive today, being grown-ups obviously, and have confirmed the story to be true to me, recalling the same events my father has told me. I think 2 or 3 others have actually confirmed the story. The area today is heavily guarded by border police and the military as well, and it's almost impossible to go to at night. It's also extremely dangerous due to illegal immigrants crossing the border with reports and incidents of robberies, etc., making an excursion to the site virtually impossible, and also extremely dangerous. This happened in the US, Virginia, near George Washington National Forest. It started off as a normal night, driving around back roads, blasting music, just hanging out and catching up with a friend when we pulled up to a sharp turn, and as soon as we started slowing down, I noticed something standing behind a tree at the turn. Its eyes were green and glowing, but when the lights from the car illuminated the tree, the figure stayed completely black, its eyes being the only thing glowing. Almost like the way light hits an object and is supposed to bounce off didn't work on its body. It was just like the light gets pulled into this darkness and not skin, like Vantablack but alive. At first, I honestly thought that it was a deer and I was misseeing things, but this is a gravel road where the tree line starts almost at the edge of the gravel, and when we got closer, I noticed this thing was tall. I'm not sure if it had antlers or if it was just the branches without leaves, but I'm 6'2" and this thing was as tall as me at least, probably even taller. I didn't say a thing because, quite honestly, I thought that I was hallucinating or something. And well, my friend took the turn slow because it was basically a right angle and then stopped. When she stopped in the middle of the road, she turned the music off and asked, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, I thought it was a deer at first, but it looked way too big to be one." She said that she was thinking something similar, so she started looking for her flashlight while I grabbed the baseball bat from the back seat. We got out and it had to have been at most 2 minutes that passed since we stopped. We walked to the same tree that we thought that we saw this thing, and we didn't see anyone or anything. We looked around for quite some time, but there was nothing. The tree that it was behind was quite small though. I mean, if you were a pretty big guy, it would barely cover your shoulders, if you were trying to hide behind it, that is. And for sure it would not cover your belly, your nose, your butt, or anything like that if you were standing alongside of it. And well, at that, we got freaked out. We didn't hear anything like leaves rustling or sticks breaking from someone running, so we went back to the car and we left to go to our smoking spot for the night. It's basically just a pull-off down the side of some gravel road, but a little ways down where no one can see you. We got out of the car and I started drinking again, and then we heard what sounded like coyote howls and leaves rustling around us. So, being dumb 20-year-olds, we just opened the doors from the car and turned the music on full blast to try and scare them away. I went to pee at the front of the car, and when the music started blasting, we started dancing together in front of the headlights. We laughed about the fact that we were dancing right where I had peed, and we had a pretty good time. But I must admit, the whole time it just felt like we were being watched by something. That feeling you get when somebody's staring at you was just always there, but I guess we really didn't care at the time. I drew a picture at work the next day and I sent it to her, and she said it kinda does look like what she saw, but that she didn't want to talk about it anymore. I still don't know what it was, but I'm glad that she was sober because I thought that I was just seeing things. She still lives near where this happened and says that she hasn't seen it again, but later on in the winter, we went sledding at night. We work night shifts, so she usually does random stuff in the dead of the night, near her house, and when we were walking down a trail to get to a bigger hill, we heard loud bangs like a door being slammed open and shut. There was a full moon that night with snow on the ground, so you could still see pretty well at night, and there was a house on the top of the hill I noticed when I looked up. So I asked her if she thinks that her neighbors are mad, and well, then she told me that her neighbor had died recently, and that no one lives in that house now. We walked back to her place eventually, and we just kept sledding there instead. No feelings of being watched that time, but it was kind of weird to know that somebody had died in that house and we had seen whatever we saw that night not long ago. So, this isn't something that I personally witnessed. I was told this story by one of the men who allegedly saw it. For context, this guy had run with some questionable crowds and did what jobs he had to do to make money at times, if you get my drift. So, he has a lot of stories. I mostly consider this a tall tale, but there is still enough of it that makes me wonder, well, what if? According to him though, we call him Zed, he had been finishing up some work down in Louisiana back in the late 1990s with his buddy and had a few days to kill, namely to get some fishing and hunting in, albeit out of season. One of the guys that they had worked with gave them directions to a spot way back in the swamps and marshes, or the bayou as it's more commonly called, that they could do that without risking being caught by fish and game agents. He said one of the best things about this spot was there were, oddly enough, never any alligators there. Bit of a red flag, that one for sure. Anyways, one fine morning they set out in their boat before the sun was up, navigating their way through the swamps. From what he described, this was a section that was close to the Mississippi border, routes used by smugglers to move various products across state lines. They finally arrived at the spot after a few hours and some detours, their way of not saying that they got lost, turned off the motor on their boat, and started fishing. The trees were just thick enough to prevent you from being seen from overhead, and they were essentially in a huge inlet that was somewhat sheltered from the rest of the bayou, and had the start of solid land along two sides of it. By solid land, that also meant that you could walk across 10 to 15 feet of muck that could suck your boots off before you got to the solid ground. So, according to Zed, the day was progressing and fishing wasn't going great, but they still had some beer, so they weren't inclined to go anywhere. They both noted that, as the guy had said, there were no alligators. Normally, you could spot them lurking around or sunning themselves, but they were just utterly gone from that spot, as were most of the big fish it seemed. It was at this point that they observed a herd of feral hogs emerge from the undergrowth on one side of the lagoon and make their way to the muck that was described before, and commence to start rolling and rooting around in it to their heart's content. Zed and his buddies slowly angled their boat closer, as they had sidearms with them and certainly had no issues with getting wild pork instead of fish if the opportunity was there. The hogs were leery but not afraid, keeping the humans in their line of sight as they frolicked. Zed saw that they had no real way to get to a hog if they shot it there, so they just sort of floated along and watched for a good opportunity. But instead, they saw something else entirely. According to Zed, that's when they saw the mud start to move. He knew instantly that it wasn't an alligator, as an alligator would be flailing around in the mud trying to reach the hogs, and whatever this thing was, it was covered in the mud. Now, the only way that he could describe it was something was pushing its way through the muck, like a mostly submerged bulldozer, creeping up on the pigs. They watched as it slowly approached a cluster of hogs who had noticed the movement, but seemed more curious about what it was than afraid. One of them, a pig that Zed esteemed was between 150 to 175 pounds, was the furthest out in the muck and made the mistake of attempting to sniff at whatever the intruder was. Zed said that quicker than they could react, something lunged out from the muck and was suddenly attached to the pig's head and face. As the pig thrashed and tried to jump back, letting out the most blood-curdling scream that they'd ever heard, the thing was hauled partially out of the muck and came into better view. Zed realized quickly that it seemed to be an alligator snapping turtle of proportions that he had never ever heard of. I mean, he's seen the one that they keep at the Bass Pro Shop that got big enough that it cracked the tank and had to get a new one, and he said that it was like comparing a chihuahua to a pit bull. It was still partially obscured by the muck that was covering it, but Zed swore that its shell had to be at least the size of the hood from a Volkswagen Beetle. He was an extreme car enthusiast, so he knew his vehicles. His best guess on its weight was it was well over 500 pounds, and was now backing up into the deeper water, dragging the pig with it. Zed said, from what they could see, the turtle's head was so big that it was able to fit its jaw partially around the pig's skull, and its beak was now essentially acting as a meat hook. Apparently, it was about a 30-second fight to drag the pig out of the lagoon, but Zed said that it was clear that the pig just never had a chance. The turtle dragged it out into the water, and the pig made one last desperate attempt to break free. Apparently, too, hearing something scream underwater one last time is as unnerving as you'd imagine, and Hollywood really doesn't get the sound right. It then just went absolutely quiet after that. According to Zed, he and his buddy sat there for a minute processing what they had just seen, and except for the froth on top of the water and stirred up mud, there was no sign anything had just happened. The other hogs had obviously fled as soon as their comrade was attacked, and except for some bugs, it was almost completely silent. They couldn't say why, but Zed said that they booked it out of there at that point, that something was off and it just felt wrong to be there. And I mean, it wasn't like they could go to Fish and Game and describe what they saw, but they did fill in their acquaintance on why there were no alligators in that area. As far as Zed knew, nobody else had ever seen this colossal turtle before and came forward to talk about it at least. But Zed said that it was big enough that if it caught a person unawares, it could easily overpower and kill a human the same way that it did that pig. Or perhaps if you had a body, this would be a great place to get rid of it. Again, this is how the story was told to me. It's not my story, and I'm inclined to mostly believe that it's a tall tale, or an exaggerated one at least. But it does highlight that you don't need something as fanciful as a skunk ape or a Bigfoot to be nervous about what might be lurking just out of sight. So a few years ago, I was on vacation to Edisto Island, SC, with my family, mum, grandma, uncle, husband, and 2 of my young kids. On day 5, I noticed that my storage was full on my phone when I went to take beach pics, so I checked and found a 23-minute long video, 23 minutes and 17 seconds to be exact, of me sleeping in the bed. After watching it a couple of times, honestly, I was half scared to death. The video, it was taken super early in the morning. My husband was sleeping in the twin bed beside me, 2 beds in our room. I was in one and him in the other bed, while my kids were both in the kitchen with my other family members mentioned above. In the video, you can hear the voices of all of my family members in the distance, kind of being loud, but you can tell that they're definitely in a different room. The video zooms in on my hair for a long time, and at the angle that it had to be to film me. There's absolutely no way that it could have been me recording, is what I'm getting at. I mean, you can see me roll over and the whole bed moved when I do, yet the phone kept recording me and stayed completely still. It moved in a sort of weird robotic way when it did, while recording. So steady that I don't see how it could be even a person recording. It stayed on me most of the video, continued to zoom in and out on my hair. Then it slowly turned to my husband laying in the other bed, showing him sleeping, so it definitely wasn't him recording me. This also might be too much information, but I sleep in my underwear only, so I'm positive that it was not any family member trying to play a trick on me. None of them would have recorded me naked, and hearing them in the other room ruled them out anyway. We were staying in a condo on the second floor up. Our doors were locked and it was a small room. I really don't see how someone could have gotten in, especially without waking us. Plus, they would have had to have been standing above me with my phone. It freaks me out. You can also hear me starting to wake up near the end of the video, saying my husband's name while I'm sort of half asleep, telling him, "You know we need to get up soon, right?" Followed by, "I'm freezing." I've thought on that so much too. I really have no way to explain this. I don't really believe in ghosts enough to say that it could be something like that, but I just really can't explain it. It still gives me chills, and I can no longer sleep with my phone beside my bed since it happened, unless it's on a charger, but I don't know why that seems to give me some peace of mind, but for whatever reason it does. I genuinely believe now more than ever that I will forever be trying to understand what this experience was. I don't really know what information to give here, but for some background knowledge, I'm 17, male. The friend that I'm about to mention is also 17 and male, and his name is Chuck. So I fully believe in the paranormal, and I've had my fair share of encounters with spirits, but there's a specific, entity I guess you would call it, that I've seen throughout the past 3 years, I want to say. It's like a misshaped person with greyish skin and a kind of big round head with not much facial details, human eyes and not much of a nose, as well as kind of sort of an imprint of a mouth, I guess you could say. This thing has long weird fingers though, and most of the time I see it kind of peeking around corners or through doorways. What's kind of the worst part about this though is that it looks kind of flat almost. Like, it looks sort of 2D, but still real, obviously. I live in the upper part of a duplex with just my mum, and one night after she left for work, I swear that this thing was looking around the corner from where the stairs in my house are. They go from my doorway at ground level all the way up to an open doorway leading into a hallway, and there's curtains hung over this doorway. And so this thing has its hands on the wall peering around into the living room where I'm sitting directly in front of it, but about 10 feet away from it, on the couch. And it just sort of sits there for a moment before pulling back and disappearing. I was frozen, and eventually I went to look at the stairs and there was nothing. The day after that, I went to go and get some soup with Chuck at this popular sandwich place at the kind of halfway point between our houses, and then we went back to his house, and he brought up how he saw the exact same entity that I keep seeing, peeking out from his bathroom door right into his bedroom. He described the thing exactly how I would have described it, and obviously we both got freaked out by this. Mind you, I had never mentioned this to anyone before, so there was no way that he knew about it. I didn't ask how long he'd been seeing this thing, though I assumed that it had been a while. Neither of us knew what it was or why we see it, and quite honestly, we don't even know what to look up, which is why I'm here, because what the heck, right? I asked my mum if she's ever seen that kind of thing, and she said no, not at all, and so if anyone knows even a little bit about what we keep seeing, please do tell me, because I'd really like to try and figure out exactly what this thing is. This happened some months ago now, precisely on the 5th of November. I live in northern Italy, so that was the evening in which the red aurora borealis appeared visible for us. I was chilling at home after a long day when one of my friends calls me and asked me if I wanted to go and try to see the aurora with him. I said sure, because I'm always up for an adventure, and from where I live on the top of the mountain is circuit like 1 hour in a car. So at about 9:30ish, he comes to get me and we go up. We even see a cute chunky fox while ascending. When we arrive at the top of the mountain, there's a big parking lot there and we get out of the car. It's pretty freezing, the wind is howling. We encountered only one other car on the road and one is parked at a distance from us. Apparently empty or just dark, I guess. We take some pictures. Can't really see the aurora, but just some reddish specks of light here and there. Still pretty magical if you ask me. We can, however, see a beautiful Milky Way, so despite the cold, we just sort of stand there in admiration of the universe above us, chatting lightly. Now, after about 40 minutes to an hour, for some reason I start to feel a bit uneasy. Not really with a reason, but then my friend goes to pee, short distance and remains in sight, and I concentrate on the surroundings. As I'm used to giving credit to my internal voice, I listen to it, and that's when I suddenly start picking up on something. I hear footsteps. Every time the wind goes down, they go silent, but a bit delayed. But despite this, I can clearly distinguish them, as the ice snow crunched under the weight of somebody when the wind picks up in strength. I tell my friend when he comes back. We listen, and he confirms it, as they're getting progressively closer. We made eye contact, decided that we had seen enough of the stars that night, and didn't want to stick around to find out what this was, calmly walked to the car, locked the doors, and we booked it swiftly down the mountain. We kept checking in on the news the next day regarding robberies, etc., but we never heard anything. I'm still amazed and kind of spooked, I guess, with how sudden a very calm, peaceful, and overall nice night almost resulted in a dangerous encounter, I guess. A biped trying to sneak up on you? A biped trying to sneak up on you like that really doesn't seem friendly. Back when I was about 7 years old, I was taking a walk through the woods with my parents. If I remember correctly, we came across a diner or restaurant of some sort. I can't really tell why, but I recall that I was walking ahead and just exploring the forest surrounding the restaurant a bit. All of a sudden, I realized that a few feet away, there was an elderly-looking woman standing close to a path that would lead deeper into the woods. She was wearing a black cloak with a hood on her head, holding a walking stick in one of her hands. I somehow felt, drawn to her and began slowly approaching her. I would even go as far as to say that she was actually waving her hand at me and luring me in, so to speak. The woman was very tranquil and didn't speak too much, but she wanted to give me something out of a bag that she was carrying with her. As soon as I reached out to her hand, my parents did catch up to me and were yelling at me to stay away from her. It felt like I was pulled out of a dream though, a trance-like state when I heard my mother's voice. I turned to my parents, turned back to the elderly woman who was smiling and now slowly making her way into the forest, and turned back to my parents again. For one last time, I was trying to catch a glimpse of the woman, but to my surprise, she was gone. As if she vanished completely in thin air or ran into the woods pedal to the metal. In either sense, it was weird. Of course, I was young and could be reading way too much into it, but I am wondering if anyone has experienced something similar before. My mother said something about dark witches and that woman could have been one, but I'm not sure if she only tried to explain this to me this way or like why I shouldn't talk to strangers in the middle of the forest like that. But anyway, what do you guys all think about this? Was there something more to this, or was it just a creepy old woman? So I was walking my dog in a small bush track near where I live. Keep in mind too that I live in a country with no natural predators, that are any kind of threat, that is. The most dangerous animal in our country is probably domesticated dogs. It was enjoyable as usual though. My dog is incredibly protective, but she's pretty chill otherwise. The sun was shining, birds were tweeting, and there's a small stream that runs down to a small dam in the middle of the forest here. As we walked, my dog tried to leave the walking track, but she was on a lead at that point, so I pulled her back. And I have no idea why. I said, "We don't leave the path, pup." But she started growling at what looked to be something in the water. I pulled her along, and a second later, all of the light from the sun changed. But I have no idea how or why. It just darkened. Not a huge amount, as if cloud cover had come over the area, I guess. When I looked up through a gap in the trees, though, there was no cloud cover in the sky. It was blue and clear, but the dimmed light was still predominant in the area. Next, though, I heard heavy movement in the water, and then twigs and branches breaking near me. I scanned the area. It's not dense bush or anything, but I saw something. As I'm a chaplain, I began to bless and consecrate the area as I walked. The next section of the walk is gravel, and I thought that I could hear footsteps following me, so I turned to look every few steps, but saw no one. Suddenly, though, I caught the whiff of like a dead animal, which lingered no matter where in the bush I was, and I was suddenly incredibly anxious and felt like I was being watched. Then the walk turns into a wooden planked walkway sort of thing. I continued to hear walking behind me on these planks. I also continued to pray, and as I walked, I heard a loud, very audible, "Enough" from behind me. At that, I instantly spun and did a small Latin spiritual condemnation that I know, and then I continued walking. I went to do a second round of the track, and at the entrance or exit, my dog started behaving incredibly strangely. She bit the lead and tugged on it to try and pull me up the stairs at the exit. She tugged and tugged, but I pulled her along and did a second round of the route while continuing to bless. She was randomly growling behind us and into the bush as well, but I could never seem to see whatever it was. The first time I just caught a glimpse of whatever this thing was, but now there was just nothing there. Again, we don't have stalker predators here that are kind of big or threatening in our country at all. On this second round, the darkened light continued, and I saw the movement of something in the water that looked very large. The problem being that this was a dam far away from the shore, and we don't have any large river creatures where I'm from. Again, I condemned it, and again it sounded like I was being followed the whole way around again. When I walked out of the bush, though, the light seemed to normalize, along with my dog. Now, I know a lot of this could possibly be explained mundanely, but it just has never sat right with me. The whole thing was a really weird experience, and something that I have a lot of trouble with now. I hope it's dealt with after the blessing, but I did have a feeling that whatever it was followed me to my car. I suppose that all I can do now is just wait and see. So, the first thing that ever happened to me was when I was 11 years old in 1988. It was when my mother and my aunties had a party one day, and someone called that party and they didn't answer. They were too wasted, and it went to a live answering machine. Plays messages out loud as it's being recorded. As they continued drinking, the answering machine went off, and slow breathing occurred, eventually getting everyone's attention, then growling so loud that it honestly startled everyone. Frozen and scared while listening to the sounds, and then it ended and all of them freaked out. At 11, I wasn't there, I was at home asleep, but they all decided to go to my mum's house and play the answering machine again. It was so loud that the house felt like it was shaking. But was the house shaking? Who knows, maybe my 11-year-old self just made that up, but I ran downstairs and watched them gathered around an old answering machine, eyes wide, shaking, some of them crying. I freaked out like watching a horror movie, and that's all I really remember. Nothing really happened to anyone. Nothing else really happened to anyone, but it was certainly a freaky message. The second thing was when I was about 13 in 1991. I joined a local gang in my city and became a hooligan. I was at a party, yes, a party again, and the owner of this scum-rooming house on the poorest street of the city was in Winnipeg. A gang member rented it apparently, and the other roommate that lived there wasn't home for like 2 weeks and told this dude to stay out of his stuff. The dude, though, went into his stuff to find things like Polaroids of literal feces. I have no idea what I was staring at, to be honest. Just fleshy turds in jars, I suppose, and a bunch of cassettes with weird writing or symbols, whatever they were. We're all drunk and partying, and the dude plays the cassettes, and the familiar sounds from what I heard when I was 11 starts playing. All of these gangsters start freaking out a bit, fleeing from the place, including me. We never ever went back to that place again as well. The dude who hosted the party was beaten to an inch of his life, and that's all I really know about it. I've told these stories to my wife later in my years, and we took our kids to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie back in the day. It was an animated CGI movie for anyone interested. Anyhow, I don't remember the year, but I know when we came home, my wife played the digital answering machine on speakerphone. And guess what? Yes, that same voice was on there. She literally grabbed the box and ripped it out of the wall at this point. We don't know why, but she just freaked out hearing what I told her about for years, and she believes me now, that's for sure. And about 7 years ago was the last time, and it was a live call to my cell phone. I hung up the second that I realized what the call was, and I haven't heard it since. Now, I was watching WF Files, and one of the videos had the exact sound, and my sister and I heard it, and she turned to me and said, "Do you remember what we heard when we were kids?" I said, "Yeah," and she said, "Well, last year it happened to me again." And at that, I decided to look it up finally and see what I could find. I can find by other people's experiences that they can actually receive a phone call from someone that they know. I read a story a mother called her son and he heard the growling or screaming. She heard him hang up and freak out apparently. I found out that this happens a lot in fact, like someone is leaving a message on the answering machine and it sounded like growling or snarling or heavy breathing, but the person is leaving a normal message on their end. I really have no clue what's going on, no idea at all, but it's really scary, and hopefully someone who has resources does a video investigating this phenomenon or whatever it is. Or maybe some other people have some ideas as to what this could be. I mean, you feel dread, unrest. It's small, but when you hear what I and others have, it definitely grows into, well, being terrified. I really have no idea what it was, and neither do people on the internet, really. It's a freaky experience, and honestly, I know people are probably going to troll me for this, but I don't really care. It's something that I remember, and something that's always weirded me out. And if you have any idea as to what it is, then please do share, because it's bothered me for all these years. I really don't know exactly where to start with this, but years after this incident, I had a flashback with all the details while talking to my girlfriend on the phone and telling each other our memories. This happened at the beginning of 2023 though. I, a male, 22 at the time, was working as a terminal attendant at one of the biggest airports in Europe. My job description was mostly to give directions to arriving and departing passengers in this airport, as a big city as it was, to solve their problems, to solve visa and passport related problems, stuff like this. Now, for some reasons I can't tell you exactly which airport it is, but you can probably guess from the details that I'll give. Since the airport is actually really huge and in a very key location, it is one of the transfer points for passengers coming and going from Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. So it was in the nature of my job to encounter very strange types of people and events. I was working 12-hour shifts at this point, some days at night and some days during the day, and the area that I was working in was determined by daily assignments. This incident happened during my 12th-hour night shift on the transfer floor for the airport, the common point where international passengers wait for passport control before picking up their luggage, and where the passengers of all incoming international flights flow. Actually, when we work, we're supposed to wait at the fixed point when passengers don't specifically call for us, but it was like 3 o'clock at night, and since flights and passenger traffic slow down at that time of night, I decided to patrol around a bit. I left my station and went to the gate of the only arrival flight at that time of night. I decided to wait there in case passengers needed help when the gate opened. After a while, the plane pulled up to the gate. The gate opened, and a lot of normal-looking people walked out of the gate and into the transfer center. All except that woman. That strange-looking woman who, honestly, made me feel cursed by the cold January air. She was a brunette in her late 20s, covered in dirt and torn clothes. Her hair was missing in some places, and the hair that was there was rather unkempt and I think a bit burnt as well. When she saw me in my uniform, with unusually large pupils, she walked up to me, looked scared and confused. "Excuse me, do you work here? I need help." Of course you need help. I wanted to take her arm because she was having trouble walking, but the smell emanating from her, don't judge, it wasn't a normal sweat smell, but it smelled like she was already dead, made my nose hurt, and I immediately abandoned the idea. I sat her down on a seat reserved for passengers, and I stood opposite her and asked her in a calm voice how I could help her. "I had a very bad experience. That's why I'm running away from there. I haven't eaten for days, and I think that there was something in the water they gave me on the plane. Since I drank it, I don't feel well, and my mind is all fuzzy." I didn't find what she was saying convincing. I thought that she was in some kind of mental breakdown because her gestures and intonations when she spoke were very strange. But I was also familiar with the aviation rules, and I knew that something like this should be reported immediately to the police. When I told her this, she did not like the idea, and she stood up and shook me by the shoulders and shouted, "No police, never the police." Dude, she started laughing too, looking up at the ceiling like there was something up there. The woman was making strange gestures with her hands, but her cheerful demeanor was broken by a sudden burst of crying. "No police, they won't like it." "You mean they? The police? But that's their job. Who said anything about the cops? I'm talking about the people who did this to me." As she said this, she lifted up the burnt hair that had fallen on her forehead, and I saw one of the strangest things that I've ever seen. Look, I've seen a lot of strange tattoos because of the environment that I studied and lived in, but this was different. Right in the center of her forehead was a tattoo that looked like the barcodes on the products in the grocery store with some numbers underneath. At first, I thought it was just a strange fashion sense or maybe something for aesthetic purposes, but her strange behavior in some documentaries that I had seen made me think that it was probably used by, well, human traffickers to mark people so that they could be easily identified and caught when they escaped. When she realized that I couldn't help her the way that she wanted, she at least wanted to use my phone, but I told her that she was not allowed to use my phone due to the airport security rules, and that she could use the payphones if she wanted to. Of course, she didn't have any money with her, and I was also not allowed to give her any money. Since she showed aggressive behavior towards me every time I insisted on talking to the police, I finally decided to do it secretly and brought her some food and water before going to the cops. When I arrived at the police station on the transfer floor, The policemen were taking advantage of the calm of the night to just rest, and when I told them what had happened to me and pointed to the woman, they told me that she was just one of the refugees coming into our country. My country hosts so many illegal immigrants and refugees that it is normal for them to think like that, and that she was acting like that because she wanted us to let her enter illegally. They didn't take it very seriously, in other words, and unfortunately, I just had to leave without any solution. When I went back to the woman, I realized that she had not touched the food and water that I had brought her, and repeatedly refused to consume them with fear in her eyes. I decided to have a conversation with the woman, so as not to be too judgmental. When I asked her her name, she gave me a very strange answer that I'd never heard before. It was like a name from some ancient language, and even now I don't remember exactly what she said. When I asked her where she came from and where she was going, she said that she didn't know. To get this information, I took her passport and her boarding pass from her hand. I don't remember exactly, but she was coming from an Asian country and her next destination was not written on the boarding pass, so her ticket was valid only until here, which was very strange. At this point, I decided to end our conversation, which was not very productive in the first place, and leave her alone to observe from a distance. I had to go back to my station for some paperwork anyway, and decided to take care of it in the meantime. Later that night, at around 6 a.m., my other colleague was due to arrive at the station to hand in my shift. I was going to exit through the door, where they were going to enter to the transfer center where we were, and before I left, I decided to stop by again on my way to see this strange female visitor. When I went up to her, she was holding a book in her hand. It was a book with old covers and yellowed paper, but I didn't understand what was written in it until she pointed at me and called me over. Even then, I didn't understand it. It was a book written in a language that I didn't know, and I don't want you to think that I was making it up, but it was a book with strange figures of people and other drawings. The woman pointed to one of the drawings and said, "This is how they do this." "They do what like this?" I was confused. "Can you be a bit more specific?" When I said that, she shook her head from side to side laughing. She had an expression as if I wouldn't understand even if she explained it. I then told her that a friend of mine would be arriving soon in my place, and that if she had any problems or needs, that she could contact them as she wished. I gave her directions to the restroom, where she could get food, the police station, and the ticket office. After a few seconds of looking at my face, she then thanked me in tears and took my hands in both of hers and looked me in the eyes. I didn't know exactly what had happened to her, but at that moment, my heart honestly broke, and I put my other hand over hers and I nodded. It was time to leave when my friend who was coming behind me to take my place touched me, and I introduced them to the woman and secretly informed them about the situation. My friend told me that they were going to take special care of her, said goodbye, and I finished my shift for the day. When I woke up the next day, I texted my friend and I asked them how she was doing. They told me that after I introduced them to her, they left to take care of another passenger, and that after that, they never saw her for the rest of the day. They said that when they asked the passport police and ticket officers, that they told them that they were busy enough as it was, and that they didn't pay that much attention to people and brushed him off again. I never did see this woman on my next shift, and I never heard from her again. But the whole situation, it still gives me the goosebumps when I remember it. I would be interested in your thoughts about the incident, though. If there's anything that I missed, or if you want to ask any questions, then please do, because I want to know what this was all about, and I really want to know if she's okay. This happened to me 15 years ago when I was 13, and it still gives me the chills. For context, I grew up on a cattle ranch in the middle of the Great Plains in the US. a very remote area, and our house was right in the middle of pastures, where our cattle lived about 5 miles down a gravel road from a 2-lane blacktop. The closest neighbor was at least 2 miles away, another rancher. The closest gas station, about 17. In short, we were a long ways from anywhere, and it's a very independent lifestyle for sure. When live cattle get bought or sold in areas like that, they are transferred by semi-trucks with these huge trailers. Some of you may have even seen one sometime. Many of the people in that business own their own trucks and operate independently, picking up loads from buyers or sellers, as jobs come mainly by word-of-mouth relationships. Background checks are pretty much non-existent, lots of under-the-table payments, and as such the community of drivers can be notoriously sketchy, I guess you could say. Many are very good people, just doing their job, but some are big meth abusers, making them sort of unpredictable, I guess. The meth abuse typically starts as a side effect to working very long hours and going on long hauls alone so often. This all begins with my parents leaving for the weekend to take my little sister on a trip to Dallas. My dad, he had a load of cattle coming in from Nebraska scheduled to arrive around midnight, and this was the first time that I would be home alone to take in cattle like this myself. The process is simple enough. I mean, they just back into a load chute and drop off the cattle while the receiver counts them and signs a slip confirming that they all arrived. So I wasn't too worried. I had been around my dad doing it many times anyway. My dad did give me good instructions, though, to not tell whoever showed up as the trucker that I was there alone, which, honestly, I believed helped me out a lot later. Anyways, they leave for Dallas, and I wait around until midnight, then start watching up towards the dirt road that I know the guy was supposed to be coming in on, and I don't end up getting a glimpse of his truck lights until at least 1 a.m. When I finally see him off in the distance on that road, he stops completely and sits there for like 30 minutes. All I can see is his truck and trailer lights, and no one comes out there, so I know it's him. When he finally starts moving again, I go out to meet him at the landing chute and help him line his trailer up to back up. This guy steps out once he gets backed up and easily weighs about 300 pounds, and he is one of the dirtiest people that I had ever laid my eyes on. Quite honestly, I don't think that he had changed his clothes in days, and had spilled food and drinks and cow poop all over himself. He started to talk about being late in very random directions, kind of rambling nonsense. No clue what he was trying to say exactly, but he may have been drunk and having a hard time keeping his excuse together. He mentioned a flat tire and also running low on diesel, then something about animals on the road or whatever. He eventually asked how old I was though, and when I told him, he said, "Mighty young to be out here dealing with this. You need to be somewhere out there chasing some girls. Do you like girls or boys?" "Don't matter to me none. I like both." And I was thinking, what the heck? But told him definitely women. Growing up around a lot of blue-collar guys, I wasn't a stranger to raunchy talk, but this was one of the crazier things anyone had ever directed towards me. He then went into an absolute unhinged story about chasing women when he was young back in Missouri, apparently. And the gist of it was that he'd been hooking up with a girl that he met at a bowling alley for months at one point until one day he went to his family reunion and she was there, apparently. Turns out that they were second cousins, but that didn't bother us none. We kept doing it for another year. I've hardly said a thing at this point, and he'd been talking to me for at least 20 minutes. Once he gave me a gap, I said, "Hey, we should probably unload these, yeah?" And said my mum was back at the house and would probably wonder what was taking so long. He grumbled a bit while making some crazy sexual remarks and some comments, then climbed up onto the loading area to open his back gate. These cattle trailers are huge, mind you, and have a lot of different compartments inside them. Putting a few cattle in at a time in bunches, then shutting them in the compartments makes loading them easier, and they're also safer on journeys because it prevents them running all over each other. This one, for instance, had 700-pound cattle on there. So, he let off that first group and I counted them, and then he got into the trailer and opened up the next compartment and let off that bunch. For the third compartment, he was in there shaking the gate around and grumbling nonsense, and then starts yelling out to me that he needs me to come in and help him. I was already very sketched out by being alone near this very perverted dude, but this threw my alarm bells off completely. I mean, you have to understand that never have I once had any trucker ask me or seen anyone else be asked to go onto a trailer with them, and this huge dude was clearly just trying to get me into that tight space. I told him that I needed to stay outside to count, and then he shook it a bit more and tried to get me to come in there again, said that he really needed a hand. I told him that I'm not getting in the trailer with him, and he needed to figure it out. After a lot more back and forth with this, he finally opened the gate. Those came off and had 2 more compartments left that he tried the same routine with both of them. I just kept saying, no way, man, but honestly, I was freaking out a bit. By the time that we finally had all of the cattle off, he was in a much less happy mood and started calling me all sorts of names for not helping him. He then tried to get next to me to jump into his truck to grab the paperwork that I needed to sign from his glove box, and I again had to bicker with him about grabbing it himself, as I was not turning my back on this guy for even a moment. He eventually caved, got the paper, I signed it and told him to head out, and I was going home. I ran back over to the house, which was like 100 yards away, and I watched him from the front window sit out there for an hour, as I didn't want to go to sleep until I knew that he had left. Finally, though, he pulled off, and by that time I went to sleep. It was around 4 a.m. What should have been a 20-minute interaction turned into a super creepy attempted who knows what by some deliverance type trucker, and I am so glad that I never ever thought about getting into that trailer. The point of me sharing this story is to illustrate just how quickly a hike can turn into a potentially life-threatening scenario that takes you off of the trail. So back during COVID, a friend of mine who was an experienced backpacker invited me to go on a 3-day hike with him in Bankhead National Forest, Alabama. I had never really hiked before and had no equipment, but he told me exactly what I needed, and we went to REI to buy equipment. I bought about $600 worth of stuff, including a backpack, camel pack, hammock, tarp, emergency equipment, rations, etc. Now, before we left, we weighed our packs and we both had about 40 pounds of gear, which he said was a little on the heavier side but safer. We printed out some maps of the forest that included trails and streams. We planned a 22-mile hike over 3 days, giving us time to fish because we were really into fishing at the time. The first day went by fine. It was 98 degrees and humid, typical for summer in Alabama. He told me to take a sip from my camel pack every 2 minutes, and really drilled that into me, so I followed that rule religiously. We hiked 7.5 miles and set up for the night. We saw a deer swimming down the river, which was pretty neat. But the second day, that was when things went wrong. We fished a bit in the morning and saw a 4-foot long-nosed gar, which was pretty cool. Then we went hiking further upstream. It was almost 100 degrees at this point, and by noon we were running pretty low on water, so we looked at the map and planned to get more at the next stream. However, the next stream was dried up. Over the course of the afternoon, we carried on from stream to stream, only to find all of them were dried up. We got desperate and checked the map for off-trail streams, and went about a half-mile off-trail to find one that seemed promising, but it was mostly mud. We were so desperate for water, though, that we attempted to pump from the muddy water with our filters, but in the end, it ended up clogging up our filters. we were in a really bad spot, half a mile off trail, 5 miles from the last water source, and it was already almost evening at this point. So, we abandoned the original hike plan and made a mad dash back to the last known water location. By the time that we got there, it was almost dark. I was feeling a bit exhausted, I'll admit, but otherwise fine. However, my friend, who was the experienced one, mind you, started vomiting and trembling uncontrollably. He couldn't drink water without immediately throwing it up, and couldn't stand or really even move without his muscles contracting, in what he described as the most painful thing that he had ever felt. I set up both of our hammocks and picked him up and placed him in his. We had no cell reception, it was dark, and we still had 6 miles to go to get back to where we needed to get to. The next day, he was a little bit better, but it took a very long time to make the hike back as he was constantly stopping to rest or to throw up. It was quite a battle to get back to where we needed to go, but eventually we found our way. This shows, though, that even if you are experienced, your situation can go from routine to, well, literally dying and unable to function in less than a day. If I wasn't with him, he probably would have died, perhaps off of the trail deliriously searching for water or something. I am now sure that many of these cases involve someone suffering from dehydration, hypoglycemia, or low electrolytes, driving them to go off trail in confusion, and unfortunately, to die. I have always been a staunch atheist and not a believer in the paranormal at all, but I saw something in Albania, and I cannot get it out of my head. I would like to start this off with a bit of a history lesson too. So, during the Second World War, Albania was occupied by the Nazis. After the Second World War, Albania decided that the best way to fend off fascism in the future was to become a communist and isolationist country. They closed their borders in 1946 and declared themselves the world's first atheist nation in 1967. Religion was outlawed in 1967, and religious buildings were repurposed or destroyed. Previously, Albania was a mix of primarily Catholicism and Islam, and just because it was not legal does not mean a person will stop practicing their faith, right? Catholics were seen as a special threat due to a perceived loyalty to the Holy See over the state. Shkoda, a city in northern Albania, housed a prison that held and tortured practitioners of Catholicism. Many people died there too, and they refused to give up fellow practitioners under extreme forms of torture. Now, this prison is a part of the museum called the Site of Witness and Memory. The first part details the events leading up to and following the outlawing of religion by Enver Hoxha, and the second part, well, that details what went on in the prison. At the end, you are permitted to walk into the prison and its cells, and on the bottom floor, some cells display prominent people who were held there and resistance in the face of a concentration camp. Others display anti-religious propaganda, and some tell stories of camp conditions and how information was shared throughout the camp. Most of the cells are empty, but you can walk inside of them. Each measure about 5 feet by 5 feet, and the last room is much larger. It is where the inmates were brought for questioning. The original desk, typewriter, and telephone are all still there, as well as a chair where the inmates would have sat. Now, there is a second story to the prison, and I went upstairs to check it out. But all of the cells were empty, and to be sure I didn't miss anything, I poked my head into each one as I made my way down the hallway. Once I was sure the cells were empty, I began to walk back to go downstairs, when, out of the corner of my eye, in one of the cells, I swear to you that I catch a black figure. I caught a surprising amount of detail for only catching a glance, but it was about 5'6", emaciated, and was standing head against the corner, hands on its face and facing away from me. Pure black and with shadows spreading out away from it. At first, I genuinely thought that it was a cardboard cutout that I had missed. so I took a couple of steps back to check, but when I did, the room was completely empty. I was also overtaken by a sudden sense of what I can only describe as pure fear. I wasn't in any danger, I guess, but I don't think that I was ever that scared before. In fact, I ran out of that museum. I'm sure I got a couple of odd looks from security and other attendees, but quite honestly, I really didn't care at that point. And ever since then, I just have not been able to shake what I saw. I don't think I believe in the paranormal, but I also just have no explanation as to what I saw. It looked and it felt very real. I came across this place and I just thought that you guys might have some answers, and so that's why I'm here and I'm sharing this. Is there more to this life than just the physical, or was I just going crazy at the time and seeing things? So, I was trying to sleep in my dorm the other night, but for some reason I just couldn't. Then, out of nowhere, I felt movement from underneath me, so distinct that I honestly thought that it was my pet snake. I put my flashlight on and saw that she was in her tank, so I laid back down and closed my eyes, still fully awake and now a bit uneasy. Mind you, because I've been asked about this, I was completely sober, no weed, alcohol, or anything. But then, my door, that was completely shut, opened on its own. I have 3 roommates, but one was at her boyfriend's, and I heard the other 2 talking faintly and far away in the living room. And then, after a few seconds, some kind of force smacked me in the left eye, and I see a flash of white. I get up, arm in the air, ready to start swinging, and the door instantly closes. Doesn't slam, but definitely closes. I turn the flashlight on, radically swinging it around, looking for anything, but nobody's in the room and there's really nothing there. I get up and immediately open the door and hear my roommates again from the back of the apartment in the living room, maybe 15 steps away. I didn't hear running, walking, breaking, nothing. I asked them if someone came into my room and smacked me, and they both said no. I explained what happened, and they both said that they heard the door open and close, but neither went into my room. I believe that they didn't touch me because, one, I didn't see or hear anyone come in, and admittedly my room was messy, so in the dark I would have heard them step on a thing or two before getting to the bed. And 2, it's incredibly out of character of them if they did. We're friends, but roommates nonetheless, and we won't go into each other's rooms if the doors are closed. And we especially don't hit or smack each other, nor was I or anyone in a fight or bad place with each other at this point. I'm freaked out, I won't lie, and I guess I'm looking for a rational explanation for what this is, because the alternative, well, that scares me. I want to share something profound that happened to me when I was a teenager in 2008. So I grew up in a haunted house in a town near Seattle. The houses of my suburb, they were surrounded by evergreens and large rhododendrons, which made each home seem private and secretive. Another day I'll share some more experiences. Spooky stuff happened to me all the time, but never to any of my family members. I saw shadow people, astrally projected, but cannot anymore sadly. Had an imaginary friend who manifested to me as real as any other person. I also had a terrifying year where a demon tormented me. At times, my friends would see the phenomenon as well. But when I was a kindergartner, 5 to 6 in the States, I met my best friend Lenore. We instantly became friends till the end. Thick as thieves, we were each other's rocks until the age of 16. Lenore, she suffered from severe depression and also thoughts of self-deletion, despite being a straight-A student. Artistically and musically, she was very talented, and she was popular. Not to mention, she was absolutely gorgeous. Her family was comfortable with multiple vacations per year, some of which I was invited to. It just really goes to show that mental illness can strike anyone from any background. But she had witnessed some of the spooky stuff that went down at my house, as she was there frequently. My mum was closer to her than her own as well. My home was a short walk from our high school and tucked away in a quiet cul-de-sac. Therefore, it was a frequent hangout spot for my friends, especially since my mum was mellow and welcoming. Now, one day in June, I was walking to my house with Lenore after school got out at around 2 p.m. The weather was sunny, warm and clear, quiet, beautiful and unassuming. As we walked side by side down a long street, Lenore suddenly stopped in her tracks. I looked over at her, and her face was blanched white, eyes wide open and her mouth agape in an O shape. She was staring in shock down the street at something. I followed her gaze to look at the crossroads about maybe a half a block away, and at a light pole stood a peculiar figure, dressed in a black tuxedo, black top hat, cane and cape. There was a tall man standing there. When my eyes found him, he flourished his cape, tipped his hat, bowed, and then disappeared as if he had winked out of existence. Lenore looked at me flabbergasted. We both agreed that we had seen the figure. And the next 3 nights, I dreamt of that gentleman. He appeared to me in the darkness next to a gondola. I was told that he would take me to the other side if I would just pay the price. Each night I pleaded with him, saying that I needed to live. He was never pushy though. He never scared me. He was calm, quiet, and seemed understanding. He just said that he would offer his services if I ever needed them after telling him no. On the 4th day though, Lenore, well, unfortunately, she ended her life. I never dreamt of the gentleman again after that, and I've always wondered if he visited her the same way that he came to me. Was his offer too much to handle for someone so deeply sad and scared? And has anyone else seen him? I was severely damaged by Lenore's untimely death. It took me years to claw my way out of a pit of despair that it brought me to. If you're ever in a similar position, then please do reach out if you're hurting to the point of wanting to end it all. Life is hard, everyone is struggling, but you are loved and you are important. Thanks for listening to this, and if you have any idea as to what that gentleman was, what he could have been, then please do share. One night in 2013, I went over to my cousin's house when I was probably about 13 to 14. This was in California. We were the same age, and she had just moved in with her step-siblings and stepdad with her mum. They were in a transition moving period, and her room was basically in the living room at this point. The only thing separating it was a curtain. It was weird, but not permanent. So me, her, Sav, and our other cousin Trinity were all at the kitchen table talking about, well, just random stories, I guess. The living room and kitchen were all open. Sav's room was about 10 feet away from where we were. My cousin Sav at that time period was going through it really bad mentally. She kept having really bad sleep paralysis of these grey-looking people with greasy black hair hugging her in her sleep and staring at her. I kept getting the feeling that she had something attached to her. I have always been really spiritual, along with most of the women in my family. When I would bring it up to her, she'd get mad at me though and tell me to just drop it. So I did. But back to this night, it was probably about 7 p.m. and we had just ate some pizza. Me and Trinity, we were talking about whatever, and all of a sudden, all of the lights in the house shut off for probably 1 second and went back on. We all sort of screamed in unison. No clue why, but I felt extremely compelled to look over to where my cousin's room or curtain was. And that was when I saw this, I would say 5'10" figure. Keep in mind, it's dark out but not pitch black, and we all had the lights on where we were. In other words, we could see clear as day. I just remember the dead silence, and I see this man, and he seemed to have been old, 1800s, 1900s, brownish attire, I would guess. He had a top hat on, but his skin was just completely grey. It looked like someone made a clay figure with real clay. It had human features, but I couldn't make out what I was looking at, really. What I do remember, though, is that I had a pit in my stomach. Like, this thing wanted me to know that it did not want me there. I was sort of in awe, though, staring at it for probably 5 to 10 seconds in silence. All it did was stand there, but all I could feel was disgust, anger, fear, basically any negative human emotion. It just washed over me all of a sudden. After I snapped back to look at my cousin, they were both pale and in shock too. I asked them if they saw what I just did, and apparently they had. To this day, they still remember it too, so I know that I'm not crazy or was just seeing things. We all described the same thing, and at that, I wanted to get the heck out of there. I near started crying because I felt so uncomfortable and weirded out, and called my mum to come and pick me up, but she would be about an hour or two to get me, as she was with friends, and we ended up watching movies, and eventually I fell asleep. I just remember right before, though, how scared I was that I would see it again. I never did, mind you, but years later I met my boyfriend, whose parents described seeing a clay-textured skin humanoid, all grey skin, and it was that same icky feeling. So, has anyone else ever experienced seeing something like this? This was my first vivid paranormal experience, and it seriously shook me. And when I think about it, I still cannot believe that we all saw the same thing. Hand on my heart, this happened. And so, what the heck was it? I mean, I saw it. My cousin had sleep paralysis dreams with the same grey-skinned people. Faces molded like clay, but not quite perfect. My boyfriend's family apparently saw it too, and the whole thing is just so strange. Me and my boyfriend live in an old building, a studio apartment, and before it was an apartment, it was a room in a mental institution. Crazy, I know. So, my dream started out that we moved into an apartment. Wasn't the same one that we lived in now, and we had a blessing or housewarming. When everything was over, my mum and my grandma stayed to put things away, such as gifts, pots, pans, etc. I picked up a box and turned my body and saw through a window, like through another building, was a lady looking straight at me. Now, this isn't the first time me seeing a creepy person in my dreams, but I was telling myself that she's not real, it's just a dream, so I turned away and calmed down. All in my dream, mind you. Trying to have a nice little dream, I guess. I eventually looked up again and saw her through another window. Keep in mind in my dream that the window wasn't on that wall. I made eye contact and she came at me full speed and just started choking me. I woke up eyes open, but for some reason I couldn't move, and still was seeing her directly on top of me and was just choking me. It was like I woke up and started coughing or choking on my saliva or something. According to my boyfriend, I looked like I was held against my will with my eyes rolled back, but my eyelids struggling to be open and I couldn't breathe. My boyfriend, obviously freaked out, started shaking me because, well, fun fact, when we started dating, I told him sometimes when I sleep, if I tap him continuously, which is the best that I can do when these things happen, is to shake me awake. And the first time that he shook me, she went away, but I just felt like my eyes were so heavy. My body was falling asleep, but my mind was telling myself to stay awake. Like, I was literally fighting myself to stay awake and not sleep. my eyes fully closed and I saw her again, and she just kept doing it continuously until my boyfriend eventually sat me up and shook me. I then told my mum what happened, and she full-on described how she looked from head to toe and told my boyfriend that I have a weak soul and that I'm an easy target, that I should sleep on the outside because that's an easy access. The bed is against the wall and outside, meaning I'm not sandwiched between him and the wall. Since then, my boyfriend always sleeps on the outside, thankfully, and weirdly enough, I haven't had any other incidences like this. I don't fully understand exactly what all this is, but all I know is that if it is sleep paralysis, then it is the weirdest form of it that I've ever heard about. This happened to my late aunt, circa 8-9 years ago. My aunt, Rose, then in her late 50s, lived alone since the death of my grandma in 2004. She has lived in her room for pretty much all of her life. She never married and never had kids. The house she lived in was newly renovated in 2012 because the old 1960s house was falling apart. The turning point, though, was when the ceilings dropped into my aunt's bedroom while my aunt was away. Thankfully, it didn't happen when she was sleeping. The house used to house 2 big families with maids, and at its glory time, it was housing about 16 people. My great-grandma, grandpa, grandma, cousin of grandpa, my aunt, uncle, dad, and little aunt, among others, all lived there. One by one, the family moved out or passed away in the house, but, well, the house was almost fully renovated, but still preserving the room and layout of the old house, so you could still recognize that it was the same house. Now, there have been countless paranormal-related events happening to my aunt at this place, but she's really not the type of person who freaked out easily, so she didn't talk about it too much. Among others, there was slightly moved furniture and makeup kits, listening to people breathing on her ears or some giggling. Also, seeing big non-human heads outside of her window. Everything was considered normal in my country, well, all except for that last one. Now, one normal day, my aunt just entered her room after work, and she got pushed hard towards the wall. Her left shoulder hit some furniture, a sturdy 100-year-old teak cabinet made by my great-grandpa, and she fell down. She was taken aback by this, got mad and yelled at the unknown, "Hey, I know you live here, but I lived here first, before you. Let's just be civil and don't disturb each other." The weird thing is that my aunt seemed to know that there was another being living in her room, a lady with long hair apparently, usually only sitting under the ceiling behind the door in her room. You can believe it or not, but according to some people, they can see this. I'm taking it with a grain of salt personally, but the aftermath of the incident was very clear. My aunt, she definitely was hurt. She was unable to raise her left arm past her shoulder anymore after the incident, and the reason why she told us was only because she was complaining about her arm, not about the paranormal experience itself. The ghost, whoever that was though, apparently they had won, because my aunt passed away on the porch in 2017 of a heart attack soon after this event. The house, it now sits empty, and to be honest, I really don't want it. This incident is one of a few that have truly stuck with me over the years. Although this took place in January of the previous year, it definitely keeps me awake at night. It seems surreal to me that so many weird things happen to people on a daily basis, and I'd never imagined them happening to me either. But I was staying abroad due to college, and there wasn't a single thing that had irked me or creeped me out since being here. I lived in a relatively populated area. There were a lot of young women in my apartment, and even older women as well. So I guess you could say that I felt safe in my own home. Walking the streets was also safe, since there were always people around. There were apartments, parks, houses, those full-time 7-Elevens and small cafes. I'm pretty sure there was a small motel too. But regardless, it creates a pretty decent image of the area, and it was a pretty safe area. Now, although the university taught the lessons in English for all the foreign students, I still wanted to learn the language in respect and experience the culture. It was fun, and I made quite a few friends in those classes too. And well, one day I was walking to a convenience store from the class. I remember being quite dazed and tired. It was around 8 p.m. The class ended a while back, but since I had the once-in-a-lifetime leisure time, I decided to explore the place. I knew my way around, and I was feeling pretty confident about the routes and all. As time passed, I walked and reached this giant road with some empty plots to the right. Don't get me wrong, it was a residential area, and I could even hear noises from a couple of houses, but it probably wasn't the wisest choice, I admit. Now, this is where it gets a little bit weird. You see, there's a bunch of houses, but as you keep walking towards the city and all the hustle and bustle, there is this entire secluded area of just road and streetlights. The convenience store was like 4 kilometers away approximately. I was feeling uncomfortable and very nervous too because of the previous incident that I had, so I decided to stop and sort of look around a bit. There was nothing, but I decided to start jogging further, while looking side to side and back a little bit too. And not even 30 seconds pass and I bump into someone. I felt a feeling of dread rush over me and my hair just stood up. My palms started shaking and I didn't even lift my head up to see who it was. I apologized like crazy, simultaneously backing away and getting ready to bolt out of there like I was Usain Bolt in the Olympics or something. The person, they came in front of me though, started walking towards me in little steps, and started moving in this weird swaying motion. It was almost like a cartoon, and while swaying, the person just said, "What the heck? What are you? Are you okay?" with this really arrogant tone. I say person because I genuinely couldn't tell if this person was a man or a woman. Their face was covered by a mask and they wore a large hoodie with sweatpants. The voice was sort of muffled but didn't sound masculine or feminine, to be honest. The person started swearing and doing the weird swaying motion while reaching in their pant pocket, and that was when I caught a glimpse of something shiny, and my instincts that so conveniently died out suddenly kicked in. I took the chance and fled that place quickly. I went to the store and told the clerk. They called the police, who found 2 shoes on the same spot, and along with the shoes was the mask apparently. I never did find out who it was, what they wanted, and how I never saw them lurking around in the empty plots like that. I mean, there were no bushes and the light wasn't scarce either. I have no idea where this person came from, in fact. But what I can say is that I'm glad that I'm safe. Although this happened a year ago, I still feel like I'm not completely safe. I don't know if it's paranoia or something, but I have been having a bad feeling since the beginning of this month. Even if I am with other people or at home with my boyfriend, I feel like I just have no privacy, like something or someone is watching me, which is why I'm here. Does anyone know what I should do? So I ordered a board game on Amazon last week, and it got delivered today. I was just sitting on the couch when I get a phone call. The guy doesn't speak my language, but I understand that it's the delivery guy. I reply yes in the language that he was speaking to, "Are you home?" I start to run downstairs because my intercom isn't working while the guy screams on the phone with me to open the door. He then started kicking the building's front door, which made me stop a little bit as I am a girl and both my boyfriend and roommate were upstairs, but I would be going downstairs by myself. When I got there, he had dropped the package on my front step and was now standing far off. He looked sort of distraught though, and his eyes were really red. He asked if the package was for me, and I nodded. I grabbed the package and I just closed the door ASAP. I'm terrified now, though, that he might come back since, well, he knows where I live. I don't know why he was acting that way. I was as fast as I could be. I mean, there really was no reason to react like that. I don't know. Something about that guy just doesn't feel right. So, an important bit of context here is that I'm an order chaplain for the Order of St. John, a 1,000-year-old Christian order. It is a part of my professional role to investigate and bless areas, people, or buildings that have reported spiritual activity. Usually, it's not spiritual activity. It's someone letting their beliefs cloud their logical analysis. There's almost always a logical reason, but anyway, I digress. So, these are two of the best or least explainable stories that I have that I'd like to share with you guys. The first one is really simple. My wife and I were asleep and there was a really loud howl next to her on her side of the bed that woke us both up. I thought that it was the dog at first, but the dog was sitting there looking between her and I, and it was confused too. We both heard a long wolf-like howl right next to her, and it was just very strange. The other is probably the best ghost story that I have from the job, and I was blessing a house and there was a stairway that switched directions in the middle. The client had a big mirror up on that middle kind of platform, I guess you could call it, where the stairs switched directions. Now, if I see, feel, or hear anything while blessing, I never talk to the clients about it. But the worst thing that you can do as a spiritual professional is affirm their beliefs on this stuff, because no doubt they will be seeking evidence to justify their beliefs so that they feel less crazy. So, I was blessing upstairs, and when I come out of the bedroom, the door of which was right off the stairs, I turned to go back down and I saw a woman in a blue floral dress with really long wet brown hair standing at the base of the stairs with her back to the stairs facing the lounge. And it wasn't just a brief moment. I was looking at them the whole time in the mirror going down the stairs toward the middle platform. I thought the client had a visitor come in that I didn't hear about, so I readied myself to greet them and ask them if I could get past. When I turned the corner, though, they were just gone. I sort of pretended to be blessing the stairs and turned around to look into the mirror, and nothing. I went back to the top of the stairs, but nothing there either. I was talking to the client later. I hadn't mentioned the woman, and I told her to tell me exactly what she thinks is going on there and what she's seen. She listed off a few really explainable things that I noted, and then said, "Oh yeah, and then there's this woman on the stairs who stands at the top of the stairs. She always looks at me from the bedroom door. She has a blue dress and really long brown hair. I can't usually see any features on her face though." And that is probably the only moment I've really dealt with. I've had plenty of, this might be spiritual, but I feel like I'm just missing something moments. But this one was the most concrete one I've ever had, because if she had just told me about it, as she just did, I would have thought, a hypnagogic hallucination or something. But, I mean, I saw it too, and then she explained it. I still scratch my head, to be honest, about this one, and it's one that always sits uneasily with me. Anyway, I'm always happy to chat and answer any questions you guys might have, so feel free to drop a comment below if you're looking for advice on spiritual stuff or whatever. Just note too that I'm a Christian chaplain, but I don't strictly apply Christian methods. I'm from an indigenous branch of Christianity. So my family and I lived in this rented house for over 4 years, and this is the first time that anything like this has happened. This happened about 2 days ago now. So me being a bit of a night owl, went to bed last, and I shared my bedroom with my mum and my sister. It was close to 1 a.m. and I was preparing to go to sleep. I jerked when someone or something, though, tried to open my bedroom door. I didn't move, but looked at the door for a really long time, expecting someone to open the door, but there was no one. I'm sleeping next to the door, by the way, so I could definitely tell that somebody had tried. And while I'm almost certain that someone didn't enter my bedroom, whatever it was, I could sense that it was lingering inside of my house. I'm sleeping on the mattress against the floor, and I swear that I can hear thumping of footsteps and feel vibrations every step that somebody took out there. I felt like someone was looking for something or someone. The thumping went on for maybe around 10 to 20 minutes. I wasn't scared, but I had no idea what the heck that was and what it wanted. Anyway, yesterday I came home late after hanging out with some friends. My family is preparing to sleep at that point, so they are in their room again. It's around 12 in the morning, and while I'm brushing my teeth, I suddenly look at the darkness in the house. I didn't turn on all the lights. And then I heard footsteps again. And this time I was actually a bit scared. I quickly called for my sister, hoping that she came out of the room, and she did. The entire time being there, though, I have this fear. It's not the thumping sound that I heard, though, but the footsteps, even while I make my own when I walk past that particular flooring at the section of the house. I can just tell that there's another set of footsteps. It's not from me, though, and I was standing there brushing my teeth. My mother is asleep, and my sister came out after I called her, and I heard all of this before this. Anyway, we went back to the room, and I ended up locking the door that night. I don't know if it helps, but for my sense of security, I guess, I just felt like I had to do it. But what do you guys think? I'm wondering what the heck that actually was, and if there's anything that we can do about it. Before I tell my story, you guys are going to need some context. Now, when I was young, my family were heavily Christian, making me spend my Sundays at service and Wednesdays at youth group. I am not religious now, but those years definitely instilled an awareness of the paranatural in me. Now, as I grew up, I became more independent and rebellious, leading me to seek out forms of psychedelic spiritual enlightenment. It just so happened, too, that I deemed that a priority over having a place to stay. As a young adult hooligan living in a small farm town in the middle of Welcom Valley, there weren't a lot of opportunities for kids my age. You either partook in substances, worked in the wine industry, or got involved in numerous cults around. It was about 10 p.m. and as my friend and I were just bumming some smokes from patrons behind the local bar, there were about 5 people, my friend and I excluded. We were all a tad bit tipsy, I guess, sharing tales and shooting the breeze when a man walked out that I had never seen before. He was about 5.5 feet tall with odd proportions, donning a burly mustache that really just didn't fit his face. He wore a cowboy hat 2 sizes too big, a leather jacket over a plain white tank top, leather pants and boots to finish off his outfit. He kind of just stood there too, trying to be a part of the group, yet excluded through some sort of metaphysical divide that I just couldn't put my finger on. After about 10 minutes of loitering, he started talking. He mentioned that it was his birthday, and referred to himself as the birthday boy. On and on he would only talk about how it was his birthday, that he needed a cigarette because it was his birthday, that someone should buy him a drink for his birthday. I'm pretty sure that it was his birthday after all. Well, 30 minutes passed and the patrons slowly started filtering out until it was just the birthday boy, my friend, and I. He asked us if we knew where any abandoned buildings were, and if we could take him to one, and I was already unnerved by this guy, but at this point, my entire being was screaming at me to get away from him. Like a switch had flipped, and I could feel some sort of evil intention just radiating from him. I gave some sort of a vague description of a non-existent building, and I told him goodbye. He asked me if I could take him there and celebrate his birthday with him, and that he had some gifts for us. I told him no, as I needed to make it to a friend's house to go and sleep, and he told me, and I quote, "I'll see you again, Noah," and gave a huge, inhuman grin. He then proceeded to sprint backwards for about 30 feet, yes, backwards, spin around, and run in the direction that I gave him. I looked at my friend, and we both started running in the opposite direction, cutting through the side streets and jumping a couple of fences. We ended up making it to my friend's house and making it inside. About 20 minutes pass, and we're chilling inside and smoking, and I hear someone singing "Happy Birthday" to you outside. I peek out the window, and as you can probably guess, it's the birthday boy. I still don't know how he found us, but he paced up and down that street for an hour or two until he gave up and sprinted away. I never did see the birthday boy again in town, but I will never forget that parting sound, the clicking and the clacking of the sound of cowboy boots furiously smacking the pavement. I don't know what the heck he was, but I am almost certain that he was not human. This happened when my close family visited the house of my grandmother's sister. The house was famous for its eerie stories, like how, at midnight, music would always start playing out of nowhere, continuing until somebody physically went upstairs to turn it off. I didn't want to go, but staying home alone wasn't an option either. So, with a knot in my stomach, I decided to head on over. The first 2 nights were pretty uneventful, to be honest, but the house itself was suffocatingly creepy. No matter where I went, it always felt like somebody's eyes were fixed on me. I chalked it up to nerves, convincing myself that I was overthinking. But on the last night, something did happen that I will never forget. I decided to sleep early to catch the morning ferry that night. I was sharing a room with 2 of my uncles and an aunt, while my parents and my grandmother slept in a separate room. It was already pretty cramped, and with their loud snoring, sleep seemed impossible. By 11 p.m., I was still wide awake. My mum's cousin, who had gone to a party earlier that evening, was supposed to return around midnight. I texted her asking her to bring some food, but she didn't reply. Still though, I stayed up hoping that she would show up soon enough with some food. I must have drifted off because I suddenly woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They were slow, deliberate, and grew louder as they approached the room. The door creaked open. My heart pounded in the silence as a figure stood in the doorway, unmoving. In the faint moonlight spilling through the window, I could just make out a dark silhouette. I froze, clutching my blanket, until the figure finally stepped inside and walked toward me. It was my mum's cousin, or at least I thought it was. She was wearing a dark nightgown, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. Without a word, she slipped into the small space beside me, and I whispered, "Why are you sleeping here? It's already so cramped." She didn't respond. The weight of her body pressed into the bed, and I could feel the cool strands of her hair brushing against my arm. Something about her silence, though, just made my skin crawl. But I convinced myself that she was just tired, or maybe drunk from the party or whatever. I scooted over carefully, not wanting to accidentally bump her face since she'd just gotten a nose job. The room felt impossibly still as I lay there, eyes wide open, listening to the rhythmic breathing of my relatives around me, and somehow I eventually fell asleep. Now, the next morning I woke up to my mum shaking me. "Breakfast is ready, get up, we need to pack." At the dining table I saw my mum's cousin and couldn't resist teasing her. "Hey, next time if you're going to cram into our room, at least bring some food, yeah? Do you know how hungry I was last night?" She frowned, looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? I blacked out at the party and didn't even get home until this morning." I stared at her, trying to process her words. "Stop messing with me. You were literally in our room. You slept beside me." Her face paled. "I wasn't here, I promise you," she said, her voice low. A cold dread spread through me suddenly. I turned to the rest of the family, desperate for answers. Everyone swore that they'd stayed in their own rooms all night, though. My uncles and aunt had still been fast asleep when I woke up, too. Feeling nauseous now, I went back to the bedroom to pack my things. The bed looked exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. On the pillow where she had slept was a strand of long black hair. Nobody else in that house had long hair or black hair, and to this day, I still have no idea who or what slept beside me that night. This happened to me yesterday, late in the afternoon. I had just finished buying some snacks from the gas station when a man approached me as I was walking home. It was dark out, so the only thing that I could make out was that he was about 2 inches taller than me, had a green jacket with a hood on, and had fair skin. He asks me what's in my backpack. I try walking away, but he then grabs my bag and refuses to let me go. He demands that I hand him the bag. I try my best to plead with him, saying that he could have the food inside if he was hungry. He didn't care though. He just kept fighting me for that bag. I did my best holding my ground and putting up a bit of a fight. Several drivers sped past me and none of them bothered to stop and help me. I was all alone on a dark and empty sidewalk. This gas station was in a pretty ghetto part of town. A bunch of drug addicts and violent people were around. I used to live there, so I knew that cops were regularly called into that neighborhood. I'm glad that I managed to escape that environment 2 years ago, but anyway, eventually the man removes his hand from his pocket, and I start fearing for the worst. I almost expected him to pull out a knife, but thankfully it was only his fist. He begins banging hard against my fists to the point that they bleed. I couldn't take it anymore, so in the end I handed him the bag and watched him run off. There were only some chips and some juice in there, so it's not like I lost anything super valuable or whatever. But I walked the entire way home, constantly looking over my shoulder, just in case that guy came back for more. I didn't call the cops because I knew that nothing would be done about it. I barely even had a description of the guy, so they wouldn't really have anything to go off of anyway. But now I'm currently at work with a bandaged hand, trying my best to get through the day despite the pain. I hope the guy who did all this ends up messing with the wrong person and gets the heck beaten out of him. I wish I never went to that neighborhood, and I wish that I would have just stayed home. So I was 19 and had been with my current fiancé, and at the time boyfriend, for about a year. We both work at the same chemical manufacturing company. I was the night shift lead on my team, and we had hired this guy. His name was Gabe. Gabe was somewhere around his late 50s, maybe early 60s. I had to interact with him as the shift lead and trainer pretty much no matter what. And at night there was pretty much no one else besides my fiancé's team on the other side of the building, and my team present after 2 p.m. which means that I was entirely in charge of my team and everything that had to get done. Anyway, Gabe started talking to me about his type and preferences in women. I didn't really see how this was relevant to me and made it clear that I didn't really care what his preferences were and accept that everyone had their own. I didn't want to make a big deal out of a seemingly small topic at the time, but he proceeded to share his ideologies with me as well. I remained aloof about the whole subject, but it was something along the lines of, it's fine if women work temporarily, but eventually the goal is to settle down and have children. After all, it works better to have someone working to pay the bills and somebody else to manage with all the household work. I am quite aware that this is a life that people are comfortable with, and I respect it, as I also respect other religions, even if I don't follow them. I don't personally agree that the household requires someone to stay home to manage it all the time, nor do I think if someone does that it has to be a woman. But as far as these conversations went, I didn't see any connection between them and me, and mostly just let him prattle what he wanted to get it off his chest, as it really wasn't any of my business. I am not a traditional woman, and I figured if anything I was the opposite of his description anyways. He and I did get into a heated argument once about America's economy and how it's better here because everyone can be rich, which I tried to explain how it was impossible for everyone to be rich in an economy. Well, the story moves on, and my fiancé was let go for health reasons and had to go on an unemployment benefit. We only shared one vehicle, and I only had my driver's permit at the time, so I wasn't comfortable driving alone back home at like 1 a.m. I gave my boss 3 weeks' notice, just to ensure that I could train everyone up to speed, so they weren't screwed over in my absence. A notion my boss very much appreciated, by the way. I told the team, and that's when Gabe started behaving in a really disagreeable manner. In week 1, I had a hickey on my neck. My boss knew and never made any complaint or fight against it. This wasn't overly common or anything, it just sometimes happened. But considering that we didn't deal with customers, he certainly didn't care. But Gabe did, evidently. While I was working, he tapped my shoulder and I assumed he had some kind of a question for me, so I paused to listen, only for him to be addressing my hickey. "Don't you think that's a little bit unprofessional?" To which I replied that we didn't need to put on a show for anyone, and it doesn't hinder my ability to work in any fashion. Well, what if it bothers people, or our boss, that you're parading your personal life like that? I said that if my boss told me that it was unacceptable, I would take the extra effort to ensure that it didn't happen again. But considering how nobody had said anything to me before, I assumed that they just didn't care, so neither will I. "So you don't care if you hurt someone's feelings?" "No, I don't really, because their feelings about my life are not my concern. Anything they think about is only their own assumptions of what happens anyway, making it their own imagination." Now, yes, I also thought that last response was a weird one. There's no reason my hickey would hurt someone's feelings at work. Questioning my professionalism is a separate issue entirely, but it didn't matter as Gabe walked away. Then, while we were all at lunch, Gabe was sitting across from me at the table, and I was talking with the person next in line to be in the lead when I noticed Gabe was holding his phone up at a weird angle. I didn't want to make any accusations when I couldn't be 100% certain, but my instincts told me that he took a picture of me at work. On my last week, I had been officially fed up with Gabe, and I had trained the girl after me to do everything that I knew as lead, and told her that she will be calling all of the shots my last week, and I will simply be here for support if she needs it. I also informed her privately that I will especially not be conducting any verbal interaction with Gabe, as I no longer needed to and would appreciate if she took charge, on which she agreed. Unfortunately, Gabe took a stand on this, ultimately forcing conversation with me in this last week. I just don't think I can take orders from a woman. She can't be my boss. told him that I had been his boss previously and that the boss above my boss was also a woman. He simply refused to accept it. I then told him that it didn't matter how he felt because I was leaving and she would be in charge, so he could accept that or quit. It didn't matter to me. I told him then that I would no longer answer his questions and he would have to go to her from now on. Fate had it out for me though, because on my last day, she had an emergency and needed to leave early, and with us already down another person, it was just me and Gabe that night, much to my displeasure. Again, left with having to direct him around, which he clearly had no issue when it was me. As we were leaving, he stops me on my way out and asks a question that glued all of the pieces together. I know your boyfriend is unemployed now, so how would you feel if somebody asked you if you left your boyfriend for someone who could provide for you with a house, a car, and everything you needed? This made me lose it momentarily for two reasons. I love my fiancée very much, and now currently we're going on 6 years together. And secondly, I've always worked hard for everything that I have with my own two hands, and take major offense to being treated like some desperate damsel in distress who would be with someone over the concept of money. I'm not shallow, nor am I materialistic like that. So I answered pretty honestly, and I told him that I'd be extremely offended because that's not the kind of person I am, and to assume so would indicate such a lack of knowledge about me and insult my character. And then I left, ready to never see him again or talk to him again. It was clear in the end that, from the beginning, he was approaching me with romantic intentions, and gross as it all was, the age gap disgusted me as well. I mean, I was 40 years younger than this man. I still had contact with the girl who took my place, and she told me after that I had left that he was telling people that me and him were in love and I was going to leave my now fiancé for him, and he was showing people the picture that he took of me. Which, yeah, that confirmed everything. 3 months later though, he texted me with a hey because as his boss I gave my number to employees to let me know if they couldn't come in. I told him to never contact me again and that I only spoke to him because I was the lead and needed to be in contact with others, and there was no reason to speak to each other anymore. Then I changed my number to ensure that he could never contact me again, because this whole thing was going from an infatuation very quickly to stalker vibes. This was back in 2001. I was a single mum, 34 years old at the time, and my son was 10. I took my son to his elementary school on my way to work, and my schedule allowed for it, and it was a nice start to our days out together. I would drop him off and then head to work that was about 10 minutes away. I had to cross over a river that ran through the city. I've always hated stopping on bridges at traffic lights, and this light seems extra long. But glancing around as I waited, I was watching people in their cars, the river, and that traffic light that seemed to be stuck on red. Looking in my rearview mirror, I noticed a little white-haired old lady driving a little car. She was watching me in my rearview mirror as well, and I was curious, so I kept looking at her, and she threw her head back and laughed or cackled a bit. Then she looked hard at me in the mirror, made a slashing across her neck sign, and then made a cradle of her arms, rocking it back and forth, and then she pointed at me. The longer I watched her, the more disturbed I was too. She just kept doing this over and over again and laughing. If you're a parent, then you know this is not something that you prank other cars about. It felt evil, but no paranormal stuff here, so that's just my take on it. And well, it had me pretty rattled, and once that light turned green, I flew up the street to go to work. And of course, I got more anxious the longer that I was driving. By the time that I got to work, I was in a full panic and went to my office and called the school. My son was in a special class alongside of his regular assigned class, and if he got too restless, he could go to his special class as an accommodation. So I was able to speak directly to his teacher immediately, and I told her what happened, and she said, "Boy, that sounds crazy," but assured me that my son was okay. I've often thought back to that event, and I don't know if it was a harbinger of doom or just an encounter with a really disturbed, crazy person. But, unfortunately, my son died suddenly, just weeks before his 19th birthday. And the last thing that I said to him was that, "I love you." So this story is a story that has happened throughout many years of my life, and I fear that it's coming back. As a short context, I live in my grandparents' house, and I've been living here since I was born. My parents also lived here too. It's a big and old house with 2 floors, and since it all happened in a span of years, I'll tell each important thing and jump in time, always when needed. The worst things, though, are in the end, so you'll have to bear with me. So I'm in my early 20s now, but this started when I was a kid. There were no cell phones or not a lot of tech for leisure, so I had to find stuff to play with and spent my days either playing with toys or just walking around the house. And one day, I was looking for my parents, and since their room was upstairs, I made my way there and started knocking on the door and calling for them. There was no answer, and they weren't there. Eventually, I gave up and turned around to go downstairs, and I saw behind me the back leg of someone exiting the room that I was in, like they just walked off. No face, no noise, just a back leg, and it seemed like a woman's leg. I thought that it could have been my mother. Surely it was not my grandmother, since she had a bad back and would never go up there. But I ran to see who it was, and to my surprise, there was no one there. Now, in the following years, my parents got a divorce, my mother started working in another city, my grandfather died, and I was living in the same house, still only with my grandmother and her brother, an old man that was recovering from a broken femur. He was a very sweet old man, and there was a joke around our family members that he would speak alone, and he did. Always at night, you would walk in front of his room, and you would hear him mumbling something in the dark. I never thought anything about it because, he was just a bit of an old dude, and yeah, maybe he was starting to go crazy or whatever, but one day in the morning, I was walking around my house, and I passed in front of the corridor, and I glanced him at the end of said corridor, and behind him, there was a towering man. It was a tall shadow, seemed very muscular, and had no apparent features. I was walking fast, so I had to go back and check again, and when I did, there was nothing there. And after this, in a very short time, his mental and physical condition really worsened. Sometime after, I was at my dad's house, and for the first time I opened up to him about these 2 things. My dad was very surprised and said that our family, on my father's side, saw these things too. But him saying that made me remember of a few moments as a kid too. I remember one instance where my dad was confronting my grandmother if she was playing games on him, and also my mother, and I remember him asking if she was knocking on the door, screaming and running away and stalking them. My grandmother always denied this, but I doubt she was doing anything. Why would she? And how would she, since she would never go upstairs like I mentioned? My dad told me, though, that he felt something weird in that house, and that's one of the reasons why he couldn't stand to be there any longer, and one of the reasons why it led to divorce. He claimed that there was a woman here, a pale one, and sometime after this was when I met her. It was at night. At the time, my room had a different configuration, and my bed was facing the window, so I could open my eyes and see it in front of me. I'm not not very proud of this, but I slept with a lamp on during most of my childhood and maybe even as a preteen. And one day, as I was asleep, I suddenly woke up, or something woke me up. And suddenly I just had this feeling of somebody looking at me. For some reason I wasn't afraid though, I just was confused, I guess. I cracked my eyes open and in front of me there was this window, no curtains at the time, which was not a problem since my window goes inside the house and also it's an old wooden one. The only glass on it was the small part on top of it. And in that small glass part, there was a woman looking at me deep in the eyes. She was staring and just sort of staring with a blank expression, I guess. She was also as pale as milk and had black hair, and I could only see that much though. I stared back in confusion and felt nothing. I looked to the side, put my blankets up to my head, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. But in the morning, I just could not stop thinking about it. After this too, I started having terrible nightmares every day. They were not scary in nature, I guess, but I would always wake up screaming at night. My mum was home during this time as well, and so whenever it happened, she would always come to me and try to comfort me. Now, I was sleeping another day and I woke up, but this time I couldn't move. And I know that this is going to sound a bit strange, but I felt like a spectator in my own skin. I got up and folded my blanket perfectly. And if you had known me, then that was very strange because I hated doing that. I exited my room and stood there in front of my grandmother's room holding my folded blanket. It was almost like sleepwalking, except I don't sleepwalk, and I was awake and I could see it. My grandma woke up and she walked to the bathroom and she saw me and asked what I was doing. I was standing there for a while. I turned around and walked to the living room. My grandma then called my mother and she went to see me. I was sitting on the couch with a blanket, staring at nothing. My mother told me to get back to bed, and so I did, and she told me to go to sleep, and so I laid in bed. She covered me with a blanket and slowly closed the door, and as she looked at me through the crack, I smiled at her, and I remember it, clear as day and very vivid. And my mother also remembers this too, but I swear to you that I was just not in control of my own body. I told my dad about this, and the woman, and he said that it was something to do with my grandpa maybe, or something like that. That when he worked for the railway company, a woman died there and he couldn't help her. Apparently that presence came with them and even stayed with them at the house. These days though, my grandma has passed and I live alone in the same house. And weirdly, nothing has ever happened since then. Except for the fact that I've started having those nightmares again recently, and I woke up some days ago with footsteps in my garage and there was nobody there. I'll admit that I'm a bit afraid and it all feels like something is coming back to me, which is why I'm here. I'm wondering if anybody else has been through anything similar to this and what you did about it. I certainly don't want this thing coming back, and if I can get rid of it, I would love to know how. So, I've come here as a non-believer to ask believers what they think about an experience that I had. I don't particularly believe in ghosts or spirits or the afterlife or anything, but I really cannot explain what I saw or what happened. I don't do drugs, drink, I'm on no medications, and I don't have any mental illness or anything like that. So a few years ago, I was in the bath, relaxing, watching a video on YouTube. Very relaxed actually, home alone, or so I thought. Now my bathroom door folds in on itself to open, so there's a slit in the middle that you can see through, allowing the door to fold and then a slit underneath. It's quite a big slit too. It'd go up past your ankle by about 2 inches, I'd say. Anyway, I was in the bath with my phone resting on the ledge of my bath where the taps are, which is right next to the door, so the door is in full view. And on my unborn son's life, just as clear as me and you would see each other, if we stood in front of each other that is, I saw a pair of bare feet and the hem of a black swishy dress walk casually past the door. I could only catch this figure from the slit under the door, and before I registered what I'd actually seen, it had walked past, so I didn't get a chance to look up the middle to see the rest of the figure. I remember though it looking a lot like the feet of a woman. Unpainted toes, pale white in color, but not ghostly white, not dead looking, just pale. At first, I wasn't freaked out at all. I don't believe in these things after all, so I thought perhaps my sister had come home early and I just hadn't heard her come in. The direction this thing was walking can only lead to my bedroom though, so I called out and jokingly said, "Elizabeth, get out of my room." There was no response and I thought nothing of it. I finished my bath and I went to my bedroom to see what my sister was doing. And that's when I walk into a completely empty bedroom. I searched the entire house as well to find a completely empty house. In fact, the front door is still locked, the cameras haven't triggered, and now I'm absolutely freaked out. I call my sister and she tells me that she's not home, hasn't returned home, and wouldn't be home for a few more hours as she was still in town with my parents. What made me most tense, strangely enough though, was just how eerie it felt calling out into an empty house thinking that I was talking to my sister. I'll admit too that I was very on edge afterwards and went downstairs with the television on and I just waited for my family to return. So, from someone who has no clue about these things and to people who do, what do you think that I saw that day? This is the only incident like this I've ever had in my entire life, and it is genuinely making me question everything. These two events happened in the span of about 3 days. So I live in the capital of my country, which is a very large city surrounded by mountains, and UFO sightings, they are not an uncommon subject here, but they don't happen too often either. And whenever they do, it's always towards the mountains or the hills heading towards the coast. So, in the last 2 months, the activity has kind of increased. Like, for instance, around halfway through October, we spotted a bright red light floating in the night sky around 2 a.m., and the spot where it was located was exactly on the air above the mountains. It stayed like that for about 10 minutes, in fact, hovering, static without movement, to then just suddenly disappearing. Another one happened about a month ago, by the end of November. There was this strange orange light flying at high speed in the sky at around 9:30 p.m. I could see it for like 2 seconds before it just vanished. Most of the sightings are things like that too, but what happened recently is, well, a whole different story. You see, these things are always seen in the distance, miles away from the city, but this time it happened right on top of my head. So this happened on the 16th, and I was walking to get some bread and something to eat at around 8:40 p.m. I tend to always look at the night sky because I just really like the stars, and as soon as I looked up, my first exclamation was, "What the heck is that?" And there was this tiny orb flying above me, heading south towards the houses. First though, I thought that this might be one of those drones everyone's talking about. But then a second orb appeared from the first one. They flew kind of slow and then just sort of vanished into thin air. Thing is though, is that 3 other people also saw this. They were all looking up with a "what was that" sort of face too. For some reason after that night as well, I've Felt like we're just being watched every night since then. Now, this is where things get a bit weirder too, because this happened last night. At around 3:10 a.m., me and my girlfriend were sick after the night of the 16th, and she couldn't sleep much because of a horrible head and body ache, so we stay awake most of the night, especially me to take care of her until she can fall asleep. This time I was lying in my bed, watching something on TV while she was in the bathroom. When she came back to bed, she looked outside to the street. We live on the 4th floor, and the way she looked back at me was the same look that I had that night when I saw the orbs. She double-checked outside and looked at me straight to my eyes and said, "I saw something weird walking on the other side of the street." I already had that being watched feeling, but I really wasn't expecting this. What she described was a small dark figure, like a silhouette walking fast on 2 legs. The thing is that it was heading towards the location that I saw the 2 orbs 3 nights ago, and I had to see if I spotted whatever this thing was, so I got up, but I couldn't see it. But, weirdly, on the building across the street, which is an apartment building that hasn't opened yet, there was constant movement of small shadowy things from around corners. It almost looked like they were watching us. I had an uneasy feeling the rest of that night, and even do now. At the moment of sharing this, I still feel like that, and we have no idea what we saw or no idea what those things were, but if it was an actual alien or something else, is there anything that we can do about it? So, it was in the 6th grade, and it was scouting season, where a school district will go to another school to play some activities, and we all would sleep there, and it was all girls. Nighttime came, like maybe 8:30 p.m, I think, and me and some girls were outside the quarter, or the classroom, because it was hot inside and the electricity was cut off. I don't know why, but that's just how it was. Anyway, me and some other Girl Scouts went out to talk to the other Girl Scouts that were going to sleep in a tent. I think there were 3 tents, and Tent 1 had 2 Girl Scouts, Tent 2 had 1 Girl Scout and a teacher, aka a person who was watching and supervising the Girl Scouts, and Tent 3 originally had 5, but 2 of them wanted to sleep in our quarter, or classroom instead. 10 p.m. arrives, and our supervisors told us that we had to get inside to sleep because we need to wake up early in the morning, but we all couldn't sleep because it was just so hot and we're all laughing, trying our best not to be loud, and one of the supervisors entered and scolded us a bit because we weren't sleeping on schedule. And before I knew it, we were all falling asleep. I woke up though to some sort of a noise, and at first I thought it was time to get up, but when I woke up it was clearly still very dark, and the noise was just the Girl Scout next to me, and she was laughing at another Girl Scout because she was sleep-talking or whatever, and I couldn't sleep, but I laughed as well, and then there were 3 awake, not including the one who was sleep-talking. So it was me, the one next to me, and the one next to the girl who was sleep-talking. She eventually stopped sleep-talking though, and me and the girl talked for maybe 5 minutes, and then there was this scream. It was a mama scream. The one who seemed to scream it was Cass. We were all super scared, and then our supervisor entered and said, "Don't be scared, Cass was just frightened by something." After that, me and the others couldn't sleep, but the 3 people next to me slept like babies, and anyway, a few months later, there was another scream, and it was Cass again. This time, though, the girls from Tent 3 came in crying, and one of them said that somebody had come to Cass's tent, knocked on it, but when they looked, there was no one there, and there were no footsteps or shadows or anything. We were all really scared by this, and we couldn't sleep, and around 11:30, we still couldn't sleep. Cass was still in her tent, and honestly too, I'm pretty impressed by that she was still able to be in her tent after that, but A few minutes later, we heard some weird humming noise, like a creepy humming that somebody was making. The girl next to me just held my hand because we were both pretty scared. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke up it was 3 in the morning and everybody was getting ready for the activities on that day, and while we all waited to use the bathroom, some of us huddled in and discussed what happened, and the girl next to me, Lisa, said that she had seen something in the window, and she said that it looked like a headless girl or just a girl without a head. Honestly, I still don't know what the heck was going on in that place, but I was sure glad to be out of there when we left. When I was 16, I worked in my county museum for the holidays. My job was to tour people around one of our outdoor buildings. I usually toured people through the house, and back in 1855, a doctor built this house on the land where the museum stands. His whole family lived there, and it looks really realistic. I mean, honestly, when you walk into it, it feels like you're walking in and intruding into somebody else's home. Now, some days, as you can imagine, it's pretty slow there. Like, if the weather was bad or there just wasn't much going on, then I would usually just sit the house for hours waiting for people to come in. Well, one day, I was sitting in the main entrance waiting for people to stop by. I remember that it had been raining that day and it was pretty slow, and I had only 3 other people come in, about 2 hours apart. Anyways, I was just sitting in a chair that they had provided me and was scrolling on my phone. My peaceful environment was then interrupted by a strange noise. It was coming from behind a door that was about 5 feet away from me. Since I knew what every part of the house looked like, I knew that behind that door were servants' stairs and a door to the cellar. I was a little bit startled by the noise and chose to ignore it at first, but I heard it again and I was like, if it's a mouse or something that was rustling behind the door, then I should probably do something about that. I decided that I might as well go and check it out, just because I was bored mostly. I opened the door, but the noise persisted. I had then realized that the noise was coming from the cellar door. Now, I had opened the door on other occasions, but I never had the intention of going on down there. If I had to explain what it looked like, I would say the basement from The Conjuring. It was pretty scary, to be honest. But from debating in my head, I decided to open the door in the end, and to my surprise, as soon as I did, the noise stopped. As a matter of fact, the whole house seemed to stop making any noise. I stood there for a good 15 seconds before closing the door, a little bit confused. I locked it since many kids loved opening that door and would pester me to let them go down there, and went to go and sit back down again. Well, a little bit later I heard creaking again. This house was really old and almost everything creaks, so the doors, the windows, the floors, even the lights make noise. But this was like as if a bigger person was upstairs and was walking back and forth, sort of creaking. Strangely enough, I recognized the creaking as well. You sort of know when you're at home and there's that one floorboard that creaks that everyone knows about? Well, after a while you recognize it and know exactly which board it is, and, well, I knew that it was in that area that was in one of the bedrooms. It kept going for about 30 seconds before finally it stopped. I kept really quiet to make sure that nothing would happen, and I knew that nobody should have been up there since the only way to enter was right where I was sitting, and I knew that nobody had come in. I would have seen it or heard it at least, and either way, I just tried to brush it off. I mean, it's an old house and maybe a breeze came in or something. Maybe it was just the house settling, who knows. So I sat back down and went back to my phone. About 45 minutes later though, some people came in and I gave them a tour. I didn't notice anything strange. and wished them a great day in the end. And when I sat back down, I had the sudden urge to sneeze. After sneezing, I swear to you that I heard a loud and clear, "Bless you, mister." It was so clear too that I whipped my head around to see whoever said that, but when I did, there was nobody there. Just like in the movies too, I said hello, but obviously there was no reply. I waited another 30 minutes to see if any stragglers were still in there somewhere hiding, and I looked around everywhere, but I can assure you that there was no one but me in there. Safe to say that I toured other places after that, and I never went back in there. When I was younger, 3 years old, we moved into my grandparents' old Victorian house. They bought a lovely house nearby, and due to my parents having 6 kids and a 4-bed house, their house was sold to my mum and dad as it's a 6-bed house. Growing up, we had countless weird things happen too. Horrible nightmares, hearing things, seeing shadows, feelings of being watched, or not feeling alone when you were clearly alone, etc. But my dad was Catholic Christian, so often tried to play it down. As I got older, he explained that we don't believe in spirits. Funny though, because we believe in the Holy Spirit, but okay, whatever. And that basically we don't mess with that stuff, as he's always been told not to mess with the unknown. One thing that's always happened and still happens to this day is the hello ghost though. We call it this as it's happened to pretty much all of us, Mum and most 6 kids, and our partners. And it might have happened to my dad, but he would never admit it. But whatever this is, it will usually get you when there is nobody else home, which was rare as you can imagine due to having so many people living there. But it always sounded like our eldest sister shouting hello over and over again. And I mean, it wasn't like we all wouldn't used to say hello back, as, I mean, why wouldn't we? Every time somebody came through that front door though, we would shout hello as a means of "I'm home" kind of thing, so it was very plausible that my sister just came home and was doing the usual hello, but eventually you would get sort of ticked off and just be like, "Yes, hello, I hear you," because it just wouldn't stop despite you saying hello back. I even remember once after my cousin from Australia came to live with us for a year, he had gone back home and had been gone around a week, and I walked past the room that he was staying in, and I heard him clear as day having a conversation with my brother. Honestly, I didn't even question it too for a moment until it dawned on me that he was in fact on the other side of the world. Again, I didn't know what mimics were at that time. This was over a decade ago, so I walked into the room and the room was empty. There was also a time my 2 older brothers were home alone, and they rang my dad absolutely terrified. They had barricaded themselves into our living room, in fact, as they said that they had heard the most terrifying scream. My dad first told them to check if any of our sisters or myself was home, who would have screamed, but they legit wouldn't leave that room. They said that they didn't hear anyone come in and that they were alone in the house, definitely. My sister and her partner eventually came home, the house was checked, and they confirmed that no one else was home. My dad said that it must have been the pipes in the wall, but, like, come on, Dad. Anyway, my partner of 11 years lived at my parents' house for a while with me before we got our own place and was always so skeptical about the hello ghost, always saying that he didn't believe in that stuff. Well, we moved back home for a few months while transitioning from one flat to another. At this point too, a good few siblings had moved out, so being home alone was pretty normal. When we first lived there, we lived in the basement. A Catholic Christian dad shunned us down there the first time we lived there, as he didn't want us sharing a bed and knew that the cellar creeped me the heck out, so he thought by offering us that room that I'd be like, heck no, but nope, I opted to scare the heck out of myself every night, just to sleep next to my boyfriend. boyfriend slept soundly, by the way, every night thanks to him not believing in the paranormal. But I digress. The second time we moved in, he allowed us to sleep in my old room on the top floor. Thanks, Dad. I got in from work one night and my boyfriend looked sort of shaken up, I guess. I was like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And he explained that he was sure that he had heard my sister shouting hello before. I was like, "Oh, right. Let me guess, you went looking and you didn't find her?" His first response was that the hello ghost? I was so relieved that he finally understood and nonetheless terrified because that meant that it was still happening after all these years. But yes, he got pretty ticked off at her shouting hello over and over again, despite him responding, and then panicked as she has epilepsy and thought, what if she's going into a seizure or something? Went to look and he was the only one home. He just said that he went back to gaming in our room because, to heck with that. Over the years, the voice has sounded like my mum, myself, and our other sister, and of course that time it sounded just like my cousin. Usually after a bit of helloing back, or just going back to whatever you were doing, it just stops, but it sort of eerily stops, like it was never there to begin with. So, now I'm left wondering, do we have a mimic at my parents' house? Nothing bad has ever happened to us, up to now, but, should I sage their house or something? I'm sure that my dad will have had it blessed before moving in, but that was 20 plus years ago now. Or should we just leave it alone because it's not really causing any harm, I guess? If you have any advice, then that would be very much appreciated. Also, I did speak to my older sister at some point, a fellow middle child like me, and she has confirmed that she remembers the hello ghost too. So many memories are unlocking right now, all three sisters, and we all had dreams about the same man when my dad showed us a picture of someone who lived in the house years ago, and we realized pretty quickly that it was the same man that we were having dreams about. My older, or middle sister, also went through hell in that room. She maybe had it worse than all of us, but she would hear something scratching behind her curtains, she would see shadows, etc. And I'm really glad that I got moved into her room, right? She would often sneak to her boyfriend's place for years to stay there, and honestly, I really don't blame her one bit. Like I said, thankfully we moved out, but again, if you have any advice, then I would really appreciate it. When I was 9 or maybe 10 years old, my mother got this beautiful apartment. It had a nice fireplace in the living room, a huge kitchen, it had built-ins everywhere. It was a stunning house with stone accents. I was so happy that she could afford it because, we never lived in a fancy place before. When we were doing the walkthrough, in fact, the owner was telling us that the house was a part of an underground railroad and had a special light that it would turn on for those looking for a place to hide. She showed us a spot hidden under a built-in bench where a hidden sliding door was. It led to an opening under the staircase. She even let me climb in there to learn the best hiding spot in the house. She walked us through the whole house, and it had 2 nice porches. She then took us upstairs to look at the big room with a walk-in closet, which would have been my mum's room. For some reason, the apartment was listed as a 1-bedroom, even though there were 2. My bedroom would be downstairs in what the landlord called the study. This area didn't look finished like the rest of the house. The last spot that she showed us was pretty cool though. She took us down to the basement where the laundry was, and she told us that it used to also be used as a funeral home and had a crematory in the basement. That there was an incinerator and lots of old bottles with different labels on them in one of the rooms. She asked us not to go into that room without her because she was trying to preserve it. Then she showed us an exit through a tunnel that went under a cement pond to where people could escape outside of an underground railroad. She walked us through the backyard, and really that was about it. Now, the first encounter, and yes, there were several, most of these will be mine, but my brother came over to babysit, and he's 8 years older than I am, probably 18 at the time, I would say. I kept asking him for dinner and pestering him. He was playing his video games and he was ignoring me. I got very upset and started throwing a bit of a fit. He was in my mother's bedroom at the time. He didn't like it and pushed me into my mum's closet and locked me in there. I was so mad at him at that moment. I was so mad, and I even had a panic attack. And in the end, I actually fainted in that closet. When I did, though, I felt somebody catch me and lay my head gently on the floor. And what I remember was looking up at a woman in a bonnet and smiling beautifully at me. She pet my cheek and said, "Rest now, child," and then I was out. I woke up to my mum yelling at my brother. I was still in the closet, mind you. I sat up and I looked out the window in the closet, and the lady was standing outside, waving. And then literally she just blinked out of existence. When my mother opened the door to let me out and I told her what had happened, the whole thing made her, well, quite curious, I guess you could say. The second encounter, and this one is 100% my mum's fault, she got a Ouija board. She invited her friend over for the night and they stayed up late chatting. Then they decided to use said Ouija board. This is definitely a lesson that I've learned from my mother, but do not use Ouija boards, ever. In any case, they asked the board a few questions, and finally they decided to ask if there were any spirits in the house, to which it spelled out evil, and then the windows literally all crashed shut. My mum attempted to burn that Ouija board, but something apparently started laughing at her, and she then threw it away without closing out the session. The third encounter, we had only been in this place a few months at this point, and this one is what made me know that there was more out there than we can actually comprehend. This encounter definitely still bothers me too. In fact, this is the encounter that established my relationship with God and knowing that He is powerful. Honestly, I've never had anything else happen like this, and I never wanted to either. So, I woke up to a shadow figure standing on the other side of the room. I was terrified and I couldn't move. He moved quickly over me though, and he had a very cold presence. He then whispered, "You're mine," into my ear. I was even more paralyzed with fear than I was before. I tried yelling for my mum, but nothing came out. He started to pick me up and I still couldn't move, but I knew I had to do something, but what? I tried harder to scream as I float midair in a ghost's arms. I let out a tiny squeak eventually, and it made me realize that whatever this thing was, it didn't have the power over me that it thought. Then I let out the loudest and longest scream that I ever had. I kept screaming as well, and when my mum walked into my room, she actually saw me floating, she said. She then spoke to the Lord, and I dropped to the bed. She ran over to me to make sure that I was okay, and immediately I asked if we could move out. She said that she would see what she could do. She called the landlord the next morning and asked if there was any chance that we could break the lease because of the haunting. She said yes, of course, and I'm almost certain that she knew that that place was haunted.